Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay, great. Wow, that's in unison. All right, thank you everybody for attending tonight. Tonight's February 25th, 2021. We're here for a special session of City Council for a presentation on Southbridge this evening. Anybody we will be taking public comment tonight, so anybody that is calling in, if you're calling in from a phone line, I believe it's *9 to raise your hand and to be recognized. We will do a presentation and then take public comment and then bring it back to City Council for comments and or action. So with that, Ryan, can we please take roll?
Sure thing. Councillor Willman.
Here.
Councillor Wusso. Mayor Pro Tem Kaut.
Here.
Mayor Godis.
Here.
Councillor Davis.
Here.
Councillor Stepp.
Yes.
Councillor Hershey.
Yes.
We have a quorum.
All right, and I know Councilwoman Wusso was intending on being here tonight. I think she's probably just running a little bit late. I will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Mr. Mayor, for the record, I want to say that Ms. Wusso just joined us. If Mr. Muse could make a note of that, please.
Got it.
Thank you. All right, have on here a citizens appearing before council for items not appearing on the agenda. So is there anybody who would like to give public comment on items not on the agenda this evening? You can raise your hand. The only thing on the agenda tonight is Southbridge and anything that relates to Southbridge. All right, seeing none. We'll bring it back. Deborah, would you like to say a few words?
I would. Thank you. Before Terry starts her presentation, the beginning part of this presentation is the benefit cost analysis that she did for our FEMA brick grant. And I just wanted to let you guys know that because of her work, we were selected as the state's second priority for that $31 million grant. She spent weekends working on it and endless hours and was told by the state how good it was, which was one of the reasons we thought it was really important to present to you and to the public. So thank you. And Terry, if your sound is working, take it away.
Thank you. Jonathan, is it okay if I go ahead and share screen?
Please.
Can you guys see the presentation? Hold on, I think I've lost you again from a sound standpoint.
We're just all muted. We can see your screen. Perfect.
Good. Okay. So as Deborah said, this was a requirement of the brick grant, it was something that I'd never done before. I had a lot to learn about how to write something like this. But essentially, what FEMA wants to know is the cost of the project worth the benefits of the project? So in this case, the costs of the project are the actual construction costs, design costs, planning costs, environmental assessment costs, and then long-term maintenance costs. Benefits of this project are avoiding lives lost. FEMA sets a value of $6.9 million per life lost, and also avoiding property loss. In this case, they only allow you to assess the value of the structure. No land costs. I had to spend quite a bit of time with the county assessor's records trying to screen out land costs from actual building costs. So the cost benefit ratio for the project has to come in at least at 1. Ours came in to be at 60.95, so we were well above their minimum ratio. Let me try to get to my next slide. So the model is had to be based on how fires move. We had to set a frequency of return for fires. We had to set an intensity for the fires. We had to determine how people would evacuate from the corridor. So part of determining the frequency of fires was to look at how all of our recent fires in the area. So I started with some of the worst fires that I was aware of. In 1994, the Storm King fire, where 14 firefighters were lost. And then move forward from there with the Coal Seam fire, where we had a significant number of structures that were destroyed. And in between 1994 and 2020, there were many smaller fires that were in our immediate area. So you can see some of the community impacts from these different fires, plus their frequency. So that was one of the things that I needed to assess in the model. So again, looking at fire intensity, I was able to find that the city had done in 2007 a wildland urban interface community wildfire protection plan. And that plan was actually incredibly detailed. And it was developed in 2007 by our fire protection district, the Bureau of Land Management, and the Colorado State Forest Service. It went through all kinds of different analysis of how fires move, what their intensity might be, the conditions that contributed to fires, changes in vegetation over time. If you can see this map well, these red areas indicate areas that are very high fire hazard rating. And our project is essentially right here in the Midland corridor. And if you can see that a lot of red and yellow areas are within the area that would be served by the bridge. Another thing from the report, it actually had some fire behavior for average conditions to extreme weather. And you can see here, it predicted a flame height of 8 to 12 feet, a rate of spread of about 3/4 of a mile per hour, and then crown fire activity from torching to active crowning. In addition, I looked at our current conditions. So this is from the Colorado Drought Monitor. There's actually a new report that's published each day. This one was specifically from February 16th. This is Garfield County. And you can see that in our county, most of our county is in an exceptional drought condition. We are probably right in here somewhere between exceptional and extreme drought. One thing that I was able to find when I was looking online was in the Colorado Sun on January 8th, there was an interview with Carl Wettlaufer, a hydrologist with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And he was talking about our current snowpack. And again, this was January 8th, but he said in a normal year, Colorado would have accumulated about 45% of its normal snowpack. At that time, we were at about 35% of the expected snowpack for the year. This is a table that I found, when I was looking through all of our fire data, and it goes through all of the Colorado's largest fires. You can see these are the 20 largest fires that have occurred in state history. So of the 10 largest fires in state history, 8 of them have occurred in the last decade. And of the top 3 largest fires actually occurred last year. Another thing that I found when I was looking through that interview with Carl Wettlaufer was that he said that it wasn't just that the state wasn't getting much precipitation at that time. Colorado really hadn't had good precipitation for a long time. Nearly half of the NRCS snow telemetry sites saw their record lowest or second lowest precipitation measures on record from May to October of last year. He was just emphasizing that the drought situation is very dire. So again, I had to set a rate of return with this cost benefit analysis. I had to understand how often the fires would occur. So I used our fire history to make that determination. So I said the most extreme frequency fire, a 26-year occurrence, was when we lost lives, the Storm King fire. Our middle frequency, where we lost structures, was an 18-year occurrence, loss of significant number of structures in the Coal Seam fire. And the common frequency is our 2-year occurrence. We, regularly lose 1 to 2 structures. 3 Mile fire was an example of that occurred in 2020. And if you're wondering what these occurrences are, they were just a count back from 2020 when I began this analysis. So fire rate of spread, again, I had to determine what the intensity of the fire would be. And, I really tried to not create an absolute worst case scenario. I think engineers have a habit of analyzing what the worst thing that could possibly happen. So I tried to make this a fairly conservative model. And so when I analyzed the 2-year and the 18-year fire intensity, I based it off of the 2007 professional assessment that we had, knowing that, our drought conditions and our fire frequency and fire intensity have gotten worse since 2007. But again, trying to not make this the absolute worst case scenario that it could be. So again, flame heights from 8 to 12 feet, rate of spread about 3/4 mile an hour, crown fire activity from torching to active crowning. And then for the 26-year model, the intensity, I did take those 3 largest fires that occurred in Colorado history from last year, the Cameron Peak Fire, the East Troublesome Fire, and the Pine Gulch Fire. I pulled the data off of the Federal INSA website and looked at their rate of spread. So the Cameron Peak Fire started on August 13th. From August 13th to November 1st, the fire grew to 208,913 acres in 81 days at an average rate of 2,579 acres per day. Its largest day of growth was on October 16th, where it grew by 20,384 acres or 849 acres per hour. The East Troublesome Fire started on October 14th and grew to 10,000 acres in 3 days. The peak fire spread occurred between October 21st and 22nd and consumed 87,093 acres in a day, or 3,629 acres per hour. On October 24th, snow fell within the area and it was contained to its maximum size of 193,812 acres. The average growth for that fire was 19,381 acres per day. And finally, the Pine Gulch Fire. That fire was started by a lightning strike on July 31st. Its largest growth occurred over the evening of August 18th, where it grew to 30,000 acres in 3 to 4 hours, or a rate of 7,500 acres per hour. It was deemed to be contained on September 15th at a maximum size of 139,007 acres and had an average growth rate of 3,057 acres per day. So from there, I had to go ahead and try and figure out how people would evacuate. So I had to make some assumptions, and part of those assumptions were based on how my family evacuated from the Oak Meadow subdivision. So fire behavior, I set the fire start above the Oak Meadow subdivision because we had 2 fire starts there and with evacuations within the last 3 years. In the middle and the worst case scenarios, it is assumed that the fire in the 4 Mile corridor spots over the narrow ridge to Dry Park, cutting off the Dry Park access. The fire blows down the canyon and burns through an area of approximately 1.5 miles wide, eastern ridgeline to the bench on the west. It is late in the summer season and air support cannot be quickly obtained. I think Gary will probably have a little bit more information about air support to share with you later. I had to assume to guess how residents would go ahead and leave their home. So the evacuation order is issued for all residents at the same time. The residents are within their homes and begin evacuation within 15 minutes from the order. They evacuate with 2 personal vehicles. I chose that because that's how my family did it. We packed our bags as quickly as we could. We took everything that was very valuable to us, spikes, skis, those kinds of things, and our animals, of course, and got them into 2 vehicles. So based on my own personal experience. People evacuate in a single lane because we assumed that there would be potential accidents and that EMS would try to use a single lane, up into the area. I set the evacuation rate at 1,000 vehicles per hour. FHWA free float capacity for 1 lane is 1,490 vehicles per hour. But due to panic, stop controls throughout the corridor, poor sight distance, I assumed 1,000 vehicles per hour in the model. So again, I had to determine how, which route people would take and how many people were in the area. So this is a picture of the 4-mile corridor. According to the county, there are 457 homes. And Cheryl Bauer, the community development director, said that in Garfield County, the average number of people per household is 2.86. So in this particular corridor, that calculates to be 1,307 people. I do believe that that's probably a low number. My experience with the 4-mile corridor is that there are a number of families up there, and there just really aren't that many households that have, a household of 3 people. Again, this is the 3-mile corridor, and I needed to look at how the 3-mile residents would try to evacuate. This was their evacuation route. Here, I have this blue line that connects back to 27th Street Bridge, and this is the South Bridge route. I forgot to point that out on the last slide, but in all of these slides, the orange represents the construction of South Bridge. This is the South Glenwood area. Again, trying to represent the different subdivisions along the route. This is again South Bridge. This is the route to 27th Street Bridge. This corridor contains 607 homes and an estimated 1,736 people. So this is where I started to make calculations based on the distance out, the number of people, and what would happen at the different intersections. In the 18-year model, again, I used the fire radius spread from our 2007 professional assessment. Overall, it takes about 1.8 miles to clear the 4-mile corridor for ground emergency operations to reach the fire from the Midland corridor. EMS and fire response are hampered by the evacuation order. 1 fire station exists at the bottom of 4-mile road. Those firefighters begin to try to evacuate respond to the residents directly. All other fire and EMS assistance must approach from Dry Park Road, and Dry Park, as you know, is twisting and unpaved and subject to accidents in a high stress, low visibility situation. Additional support from the other fire departments in the Roaring Fork Valley and stations within Glenwood Springs take 1 hour to approach from through Carbondale on Dry Park. Oak Meadows is roughly 1.24 miles wide from the top of the subdivision to a 4-mile road. If the fire travels 1 mile while additional support arrives to the area from Dry Park, 80% of the 189 homes in Oak Meadows are lost, 152 homes. In the 26-year model, without Southbridge, again, I used the fire radius spread from the Cameron Peak Fire, the East Troublesome Fire, and the Pine Gulch Fire. Again, all of these fires occurred in 2020. At 849 acres per hour, the fire covers the 4-mile corridor in 7.9 hours, or approximately 1.1 miles per hour. It takes approximately 2.3 hours to clear the residents and get additional ground support to the area. In this scenario, the fire moves through Oak Meadows and Black Diamond subdivisions. 201 homes are lost and no lives are lost. In the East Troublesome Fire, this was the scenario that I used in the FEMA cost benefit analysis. And again, I tried to not create the absolute worst case scenario that could happen. This was a compromise between the Cameron Peak Fire and the Pine Gulch Fire. At 3,629 acres per hour, the fire covers the 4-mile corridor in 1.85 hours, or approximately 3.8 miles per hour. It takes 1.6 hours to clear the residents of South Glenwood through the 27th Street roundabout. 914 cars are backed up 3.8 miles on 4-mile road, waiting for traffic to clear off of Midland. 4-mile traffic moves for approximately a third of an hour before the fire catches the line of traffic. 270 cars make it off of the road. 644 cars are trapped. 921 people are lost. All homes in the corridor are destroyed. In the Pine Gulch Fire, this is again the worst case scenario. At 7,500 acres per hour, the entire 4-mile corridor of 6,720 acres is consumed in 54 minutes. All of the Oak Meadows residents and most of the Black Diamond residents are trapped in their homes. The other residents within the 4-mile corridor are able to leave their homes, but are trapped on 4-mile road by the fire. The fire reaches the southern boundary of the city in 54 minutes. In that time, 900 cars from South Glenwood have reached the State Highway 82 intersection. 432 cars still remain on Midland and extend 1.8 miles down the corridor. The fire moves through South Glenwood in 11.9 minutes. An additional 199 cars escape. All residential areas south of the bridge are lost. Total lives lost from the 2 corridors is 1,258. Total homes lost from the 2 corridors is 1,032. Again, going with the idea of a cost benefit analysis, this is where we model what happens with Southbridge in place. So in this model, again, using the 2007 fire rate of spread, in the unmitigated scenario, it takes approximately 1.8 hours to clear the corridor for emergency services. In the mitigated scenario, with Southbridge in place, full EMS ground response occurs roughly 39 minutes sooner. However, if Dry Park Road remains open, the fastest EMS response is still from Dry Park Road, estimated at 1 hour. In 1 hour, 80% of the homes in Oak Meadows are lost, estimated at 152 homes. In the 26-year model, again, the East Troublesome Fire, at 3,629 acres per hour, the fire moves through the entire corridor in 1.85 hours. It takes approximately 1.4 hours for the vehicles to be cleared from the lower corridor with both evacuation routes in place. Ground-based EMS is able to access the corridor before it reaches South Glenwood. If the fire is moving at 3.8 miles per hour, EMS is able to access the corridor approximately a half an hour before it reaches South Glenwood, or 1.8 miles up the corridor. This does save the 4-Mile Ranch subdivision of 36 homes, and it also saves the 921 people from the unmitigated scenario. In this scenario, still 389 homes are lost, but no lives are lost. And because I had looked at the Pine Gulch Fire with the model without Southbridge in place, I thought I should probably cover the Pine Gulch Fire with Southbridge in place. So again, this is not what I put into our FEMA model. This is the absolute worst case scenario. So at 7,500 acres per hour, the entire 4-mile corridor is still consumed in 54 minutes. It takes 55 minutes to clear Midland of traffic from South Glenwood and 3-mile corridor, with residents splitting between both Southbridge and 27th Street Bridge. In 28.5 minutes, that's the 13 and a half minutes plus 15 minutes to get out of the house. Residents below Black Diamond reached the intersection of 4 Mile Road. The evacuation of the Cardiff Glen, Midland, and 3 Mile residents has been in progress for 13.5 minutes. 225 cars are able to enter the Midland corridor and split between South Bridge and 27th Street Bridge before the fire reaches the southern boundary of the city. They add approximately, there are roughly 112 cars in each direction. They add approximately 7 minutes to the evacuation time on each route. Altogether, it takes 61.8 minutes in each direction to clear the routes for emergency services. The fire is moving at 7.8 miles per hour and consumes the distance between 4 Mile and 27th Street Bridge in 11.9 minutes. All cars from the 4 Mile corridor that make it to the 4 Mile intersection escape. All property in both corridors is lost. 575 people in Oak Meadows and Black Diamond are still lost. This model does not predict what will happen, but what could happen. It is based on local fire history, professional studies, and recent fires in the state of Colorado. Fires, weather, and the behavior of people are often erratic and unpredictable. Chief Tillotson and Mina Bolton will add to the information about fire behavior, the Glenwood Springs Fire Protection District response, and fire season preparation. Before they jump on, do you guys have any questions for me?
Any questions? Any hands? Okay. Gary or Mina?
I think I'll go next. Hi guys, I'm Mina with the Glenwood Springs Fire Department. Recently, I was involved in a significant evacuation, an event that brings new light to emergency evacuation for me. I was stationed in Estes Park, working as a public information officer for the Cameron Peak Incident Management Team. On October 22nd, the East Troublesome Fire spotted over the Continental Divide, threatening Estes Park. By mid-morning, Estes Park was under evacuations, and I was no exception. I quickly joined the flood of evacuees onto the single remaining egress route available, which was Highway 36, a 2-lane highway. I was barely on 36 when the parking lot effect took hold. Stuck in traffic at a complete standstill, the sky turned blood red. So you can see those pictures. There's what I sat in for hours, not moving. And the sky, the way it was really hard to tell if we were in imminent danger of being burned over. And as I looked around, there were tons of vulnerable people, just like myself. And some of them were hysterical. And we all had one way out, and we were not moving. I did know that the fire was moving in my direction quicker than I was moving away from it, but I didn't know how close it was. And I was not able to tell given the sky and the smoke in the air. At that point, I began to identify areas where I could shelter if I needed to abandon my vehicle. I did have the advantage of calling my peers at the incident command post, and I did learn that the fire was still several miles away. And I'm here to tell you the story. I did eventually return to the incident command post. The 1-hour drive took 5.5 hours. And during that 5.5 hours, I spent a lot of time thinking about how my hometown, Glenwood, would respond in a similar situation. I've been in these discussions before, but sitting there for that long really drives this home.
Thank you, Mina.
I'll tag on a little bit. I wanted to kudos to Terry. This was an immense amount of work, a lot of research. And she had to make a lot of assumptions to put this model together. The good news is that they were in fact assumptions. She had to assume that air support was not readily available, that weather conditions could and would drive a fire in this at these rates and over these amounts of time, and that it took, that everybody was home. All of the residents were home, that it took them 15 minutes to pack and get out. So there were a huge number of assumptions. So again, I just want to reiterate that although this could happen, it doesn't mean that it will. There are so many factors that affect fire spread behavior. Weather and recent drought trends are a big part of that. Why my peers say that 2020 we've seen, and even in the last several years, because of drought conditions, we're just seeing this change in fuel moisture and ground moisture that's making fires behave differently than we saw them behave historically. Again, hopefully these drought won't last forever, and some of these conditions will return more to the norm for our area. And then I wanted to also just take this opportunity to just reinforce our need as residents in the area, our need to be prepared starting tomorrow, having all of our cell phones, everyone in the family signed up for the reverse 911 or the mass notification systems, so that we can get word of evacuations out as quickly as possible. And that I told Terry the other day, I said, every minute that people are able to shave off of that 15 minutes could make a difference. And then, we can do work around our residences to make them a little more fire resistant. But with the type of extreme fire behavior that is evidenced by a lot of these scenarios, the best thing we can do is get our pets and our families out of the house, and we'll see how everything else works out. There have been times that there are not air resources available, but because of the value of air resources for fighting these fires and being able to go where we can't necessarily get fire engines and get them in there quickly, there's a growing number of air resources up to and including, I heard the state of Colorado was getting its own firefighting helicopter this year. So I just don't want people to panic, but I do want them to be aware of this. But kudos to Terry for a lot of hard work. So, any questions for me?
Shelley.
Gary, thanks. And Terry and Mina also thank you for the presentations. It's pretty sobering to see these numbers, and I'm sure it wasn't an easy analysis to complete and see the results of. But Gary, I have a question for you on the air response. What is typical? I understand when we had that fire come up off of Red Hill, we already had air support fighting the Grizzly Canyon fire, the Glenwood Canyon fire. So they were able to get there very quickly, or Grizzly Creek fire. But what's a typical response time that we could expect if they're not in the area and we had a fire from one of these scenarios, start up 4 Mile?
So, and everything else being static, there's generally one helicopter stationed in Rifle. So that's a 15-minute flight for that helicopter if available. Then that's backed up by other resources that are generally stationed out of Grand Junction, are single engine air tankers. There's usually at least a couple of those there. And if not otherwise engaged, oftentimes there'll be a Type 1 or a larger helicopters available in Rifle based on our regional risk compared to the rest of the area. So that's a really hard answer, Shelley, but minimum 15 minutes up to an hour or more.
Okay. And in some of these scenarios, that would be way too late, right?
Yeah, absolutely. On the Grizzly Creek fire, there was a helicopter ordered, as soon as we knew what we had, there was a helicopter ordered. But because of the fuel and the weather conditions, that one helicopter was pretty much unable to put any kind of a check on that fire, any kind of meaningful check. It did, however, we can prioritize evacuation routes and the first engines that come in. We have the option of trying to prioritize protecting evacuees and evacuation routes. But yeah,
Okay.
Things can easily get completely out of hand in much less than that response time.
Okay. Thanks, Gary.
Charlie, then Paula.
So Gary, one kind of maybe informational thing and then a question. You mentioned reverse 911. I know I'm signed up for that. Can you just briefly tell for the audiences listening how they would sign up for reverse 911? So if they want to do that, they can, and haven't, they get that done.
Absolutely. And I apologize. I probably should have prepared a slide and actually been able to put it on the screen, but on our website, on the Garfield County Communications website, and our website is obviously linked to the city's website. There is a link. It's to our Garfield County Dispatch Center, which is where folks go online to register their cell phones, so that cell phone is registered with their address, so that and it's good that everybody in the house has their cell phone registered to that address, so that some of the scenarios that Terry prepared here, if one or more family member is at home and the one that has their cell phone registered is in town at work, they're all going to get simultaneously notified via the reverse 911 system that the area where their home is has been evacuation has been ordered. So our website, the city website has a link, Garfield County's website has a link, and as does Garfield County Communications. Charlie.
Thanks, Gary. And then the other thing I wanted to maybe have you comment on more than ask a question is, you talked about defensible space, and I know there's been a lot of things that I've read about it recently. Do we have, that as the Glenwood Springs Fire Department and our Rural Fire Protection District or the other local fire protection districts, do they have resources that if you want to find out what you need to do to increase the defensible space around your house, they can go to those resources to learn how to do that?
Absolutely, Charlie. Thank you for the excellent question, excellent reminder. Not all the fire departments have exactly the same resources available, but any of the fire departments have some advice and or resources available. if the money holds out, or as long as the money holds out, even with Glenwood Fire, we do have a small grant program to where we can help homeowners with some of their reimbursing some of the costs that they run into when they're trying to create defensible space around their properties. So yeah, it's available again via all those same websites. There's links to get that help.
Okay, thank you very much, Gary.
Thank you.
Paula,
Wow. Great. I think I'm ready. I'm doing my phone. So just a real quick question to Terry. Terry, we have a lot of construction planned for the next 2 summers, particularly along Midland. Do we have plans for those companies should something happen where they can quickly be out of the way, or anywhere there might be construction where we have to consider that in town? Is that part of the planning process for those construction projects?
That's a great question, Paula. I remember when we had the Sunrise fire just up above immediately adjacent to the airport. And that happened when we were constructing the 27th Street Bridge. When we were notified of the fire, Jessica and I, called the contractor and said, you have to pull out. There's a fire and we may need to evacuate. And they immediately cleared the site. We have that ability, in the case of the 27th Street Bridge, it did lend itself to some of our issues with, delay and those kinds of things. But I think it's well worth, that kind of issue to clear the corridor. And, we have that ability at any time.
Okay, thanks.
Ingrid.
So first and foremost, Chief, thank you so much for everything you did this last year. We are so.
Did we lose Ingrid?
Ingrid,
Yeah.
you're on mute.
Oh, thank you. No, so I pontificated there for a minute. Gary, thank you so much for everything you did for the community this last year. Like, thank you.
It was a team effort. It was a team effort. I
appreciate every member. With that, and this presentation, what more can we do to prepare our citizens so that an evacuation is done as effectively as possible? So that, what education, what level, what do you need from us to get to a point where where everyone knows about the emergency alert system? And if you don't have the answer tonight, that's fine, but how do we get our community as prepared as possible for an event like this?
You're absolutely right. It's a huge educational process. And we can always use help any way we can in trying to it does come back to some basics. It comes back to, for people to be prepared. So when they get the phone call, they've already thought about having a communications plan. We're in the process of revamping a checklist that we're going to put on our website for people to look at. They can always call us and get that advice. But going through the checklist, knowing where your important documents are, hopefully stored offsite. There are going to be a whole lot of banks that love hearing me say that you should keep the stuff that's difficult or irreplaceable in a safety deposit box. And I got a tag on there. Having your cell phones registered, having a communications plan with the rest of your family so that when an evacuation does get ordered, people know where you're gonna, where, and that's really difficult because we don't know whether we're gonna order an evacuation to go west or east or south out of Glenwood Springs or all of the above. So where is the preferred place that people could end up when evacuated, and how does the rest of their family get a hold of them, and those types of things? Or what family member, once you're evacuated safely, are you going to call to let them know? So it's a huge educational process. I think the checklists are probably one of the most important tools. And then I do want to tag on that I like Mina, I can't get enough thrills, right? So I go off, and I was in the East Troublesome the night of the blow up and saw a lot of firsthand things that were terrifying. But in the aftermath, I asked the question, I said, so how did the fireproof safes that a lot of people own hold up? And the answer was none of them survived, right? Those houses burned in excess of 2000 degrees, right? You read the label on any fire safe and it'll say it's good for 1300 degrees for a couple of hours. Yeah, if you have a fire in your home and the fire department responds quickly and you know, your stuff may survive. But the message for me is if your house is in fact, unfortunately consumed by a fire safe is not going to be your best friend. But at the end of the day, and the reason folks lose their lives in fire situations is when they decide to ignore evacuation orders and stay behind. So that again is probably a huge piece of that educational thing is, you know, if you're the well-prepared homeowner and you're getting evacuated, check on your neighbors and make sure that they're aware of it and evacuating, and you know, we can rebuild the property. So I know I got a little long-winded, but I hope that helps, Ingrid.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You know, I have when I was in Crescent City, California, a couple of years ago, in every public building, as well as the hotel, had a tsunami map of every evacuation route. So it had, here it's like a Disneyland map. Here you are. And then it had all the different routes. And then even the routes that were one way only. So two-way streets, they had turned to one way. And I sent it out to everybody on city council, but there's a really disturbing story from Outside Magazine about all the people who were trying to evacuate and the people who died in their cars. And one of the things that they were talking about is you have to keep one lane of traffic open for emergency vehicles responding to the fire, and how that works. And I don't know how that works along 4 Mile Road. And we don't need to get into it now, but you know, it struck me that I don't know, you know, to Ingrid's question, I don't know the best way out I mean, there's one way out, right? I live in South Glenwood here, but I don't know the best way out. And I hearken back, I guess, to the fire drills that I had as a kid. And I think as a community, we need to be a lot more prepared. I know there was a South Canyon fire that completely gridlocked West Glenwood. And, you know, now we know, you know, we learned from that of let's have traffic, you know, the Carbondale PD and there's a question coming here, by the way, guys. Let's have Carbondale PD or CSP stop the traffic there so that we don't gridlock thing. I guess my question is, and maybe this is a Deborah question, you know, we've talked about some of these issues before, but what resources, I mean, other than obviously Southbridge, what can we be doing to advance that? That community-wide, more than just the reverse phone calls or maybe the little maps, but the whole community knows exactly what to do when there's a fire in this place.
Thank you, Mayor. City Council picked, you know, hiring a deputy fire chief to focus on emergency management as one of their higher priorities in your 2020 strategic vision. I couldn't get there in 2020. I don't think I can afford not to get there now in 2021. I'm asking your permission. We'll have to formally amend the budget to hire a deputy fire chief that can focus on emergency management planning, because it's not just this fire, it's debris flows, it's flooding, it's mud flows, it's everything that we face year after year. We really need additional capacity to do emergency management planning, because hopefully this scenario will never come to pass, but some scenario is going to come to pass. And it's our job to plan for, you know, medium case scenarios, worst case scenarios, all scenarios. And I think we're there.
I think that's pretty reasonable to put on the very next agenda then for conversation. Paula. Thank you, Deborah.
Deborah, maybe you know this, or Gary, do you know this? Do we have access through Prim Ranch if we needed it to get out of town? Is that, so I know it's not, it wasn't opened by Garfield County, or I know that whole situation in history. I'm just wondering, in an emergency situation, would we be able to do that?
We do. We revitalized our plans for using the Prim Ranch Road during the Grand Avenue Bridge reconstruction process. So yes, it's not automatic. It takes a little bit of manpower to get out there and get the gates open. And ultimately that becomes a little bit problematic in that it needs to be one-way traffic in this type of a scenario because of the narrow road and bridge and everything out there. But it is an option in an emergency situation. Yes.
Great. It's nice to know we have that backup. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Anything else from staff?
Actually, Jonathan, I'm going to add just a couple of things because I think, from a fire preparedness standpoint, it's really been beneficial for my family. We have packed our passports, our birth certificates, our social security numbers, all of our insurance documents, the ownership to our vehicles into a manila folder that sits by our door. And I first did that in 2012 when I came here, and I've used that packet a number of times just to be able to take it out of my house, when we're leaving, and to know that I don't have to search for anything. It's right there by the door. The other thing that my family's found useful in the last couple of evacuations is to have kennels for all of our animals. The first time I had to evacuate in 2018, I only had a soccer backpack for my cat. So I had to stuff my cat into a backpack. So since then, I have a kennel for all of our animals, and it's really, I think those things just, make these kinds of decisions easier and faster.
Thanks, Terry. All right.
Mr. Mayor, there may be one public, I don't know if you want to take public questions, but there's one person in the audience that had a question.
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to object to any public questions at this time. This is presentation. So Mr. Willman is out of order. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I will we'll take public comment. And if there's a question embedded in that comment and it's pertinent, then I will allow staff to answer that briefly. I don't want to get into a back and forth, just for the public, by the way. But as part of the public comment, if you have a comment to make, if you have a question, there's a chance it might be answered, a chance it might not be answered. But we'll try to address items about Southbridge, this fire, potential evacuation routes. So anything in that regards, we're more than happy. We have the people here that are the subject experts in it. Shelley, do you have a question?
Yeah, I had one more quick question on the Prim Ranch Road, because that's been brought up before, and I'm just curious. When I've seen that road and looked at it, it's a not a very wide roadway with a very steep drop off. So I'm wondering, do we have any idea of how that might function? Like how many vehicles could actually get through there, say, per hour or whatever?
Shelley,
on that, Terry.
I didn't even analyze that one for a couple of reasons. One was that, like Gary said, it takes some time to get out there and get that gate unlocked. And we're, in a very short time frame here. And under the worst fire conditions, I feel like Prim Ranch is a lot like Dry Park, that, it is surrounded by very combustible material. and that it's very narrow, and that there'd be a high possibility of somebody getting out there and having an accident and blocking the road. So I included Dry Park in the analysis, but I didn't add in Prim Ranch for those reasons.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any further questions, comments? Okay. We'll turn to public comment at this point. Please raise your hand. If you call it again, it's *9. Please remember to give your name, your address. Please be brief, concise. We have 64 commenters, and I want everybody to have their say. But at the same time, there might be a lot of people who want to have their say. And so if everybody uses their 3 minutes, this is going to be a very long 4 hours. So please name, address, and I'll just take them in order. Heather McGregor. Your unmute button is on the bottom left. Heather McGregor. Okay. Heather, we'll come back to you. Gary Vick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is this comment period just based on Terry's presentation, or is this comment period meant to be for the upcoming discussion later tonight?
As in?
I understood you were going to be discussing some other items about the airport tonight. Is that not correct?
Yes, we are going to be doing that, but comment period for this is specifically, this action item is specific for the evacuation route presentation.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to be brief. First of all, my heartfelt thanks to the Glenwood Springs Fire Department and everything they do for us all the time, and especially last summer when things were really tough. And Terry, I thought your presentation was extremely good. I do have a lot of questions that maybe the mayor will let you answer, because I think others might be interested in the answers as well. You had a lot of different scenarios, and I was trying to keep track of everything. Could you perhaps encapsulate, Terry, maybe in like 25 words or less, with respect to the evacuation routes, what South Bridge does for us? In other words, what does the world look like with and without South Bridge? And then also, please verify that your assumption for the fire that comes down 4 Mile was sort of a sudden flare-up event that comes down 4 Mile, as opposed to something that starts further west or north or south, which would give people logically much more time to evacuate. It would be a little unusual, I think, if the fire just flared up at the top of 4 Mile and came racing down 4 Mile. And I wanted to verify that that is or is not your assumption. And those are my 2 questions. And hopefully you can answer those for us.
I think that will be addressed in the coming presentation, Terry. So unless you have a burning desire to get into that now, why don't we say that for the next agenda item?
Okay, it's up to you, Jonathan. I think I could answer them in a couple just quick sentences if you wanted.
Yeah, if you want to, then, if we can be quick on it. Okay.
So Gary, what Southbridge does for it is just allow people to evacuate faster. It splits the time at 4 Mile and allows that queue to split both to the north and the south. So that's what it does, and it does save lives. I did model the fire start up above Oak Meadows, and you're right. I mean, we have had 2 fires up above Oak Meadows that have required evacuations in the last 3 years. And so that's why I started it there. Now, would it, immediately be a huge fire? I can't speculate about that, but that's why I started it there. And yes, you're right. I did start my model right up above Oak Meadows.
All right, Heather, are you able to
Yes, I
comment?
think we have the mechanics. Thank you. It's actually Steve Smith, 63 116 Road, at the bottom of 4 Mile Road. If I followed Terry's schematics correctly, the traffic flow evacuating northward on Midland would all veer to go over the 27th Street Bridge. I'm curious whether that's indeed the assumption, or if some of that traffic could branch to go north on North Midland, and whether that would affect the rate of pace of moving people out. Thank you.
Steve, that it doesn't really affect the pace, but yes, they could split there. It wouldn't make it any faster because we have such a long progression from the intersection of 4 Mile, and all of those neighborhoods going north. But in the event that State Highway 82 was really backed up, which actually was the case in the coal seam fire, where the fire was coming from the west, and people were evacuating on State Highway 82, that could be a better option. We might have more free flow on Midland than we would on State Highway 82.
Okay.
So I guess we can.
Thank you. Ernie Morello. You're up. Ernie, unmute your, there you go. Hello, Ernie. Okay, Ernie, we'll come back to you. Jay Andrews, you're up.
Yes, hello, my name is Jay Andrews, and I'm a resident of Edwards, Colorado, and I travel to Glenwood Springs, both by freeway and by air frequently. My mailing address here is P.O. Box 4127 Edwards 81632. I really understand and appreciate the needs for multiple evacuation plans and routes. My daughter and her family were evacuated from the Northern California car fire just a few years ago, and the extended family lost their home during that fire. Chief Tillotson and members here of the council mentioned that the evacuation options are important, and various roadways provide great alternatives for evacuation. I would submit that the airport itself also provides an additional means of evacuation, both by fixed wing and by rotorcraft out of the airport. Glenwood has got freeways in and out of the city. It's got railway lines that are in and out of the city, and also air travel in and out of the city. My concern is that shortening the runway for the current proposal would really diminish the effectiveness and usefulness of the airport in the event of an emergency.
And Ernie, I'm sorry, Ernie, do you have any specific comments about the evacuation route specifically? We're going to have we have another
about the evacuation route.
Yeah, we have another agenda item. We're going to be talking about this specifically, but this is
okay.
People who want
I would submit in terms of the evacuation route that the airport would serve as one of the means of evacuation for citizens. And I would reserve time to comment on the shortening of the runway itself in respect to that.
Okay. All right, Jay, do you have any comment? Jay Andrews, do you have a comment on the evacuation route or fire danger in the South Midland area?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now, Jay.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, if we can come back to the airport, I'd be happy to comment during that time here. I don't want to take additional time on this portion of it, other than the fact that the airport itself would diminish its capability for evacuation if the runways were short.
We'll just take that at that point. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll come back to that.
Talk about this specific thing. So if your hand's up and you want to talk about the airport, please put your hand down.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. So I see a Davey. Davey, name and address, please. Hello, Davey. Okay, I see a Dave Merritt, Mr. Merritt.
see. Just a quick observation from the perspective of somebody who was on city council in 2002 when Coliseum happened. Number one, we were, quote, lucky in that it happened at shift change for the police department. So we had twice as many officers on duty as we normally would, and they stayed and they did a hell of a job. You can never have enough evacuation routes. And, you know, people were leaving their cars on 6 and 24 and walking because it was so bad. So, you know, I think Terry has done an excellent job on this, and I appreciate the analysis. You know, it may seem, you know, overly conservative and with a fast fire, but, you know, if it has happened, it can happen. And thank you very much for your analysis, Terry. As all.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for that perspective. As a former councilman and also a neighbor here in South Glenwood Springs. Davey, we'll come back to you. Davey, are you able to comment? Okay. Looks like Jim Desmore. Do you have a comment on the fire evacuation route or
Yes,
anything?
sir. Jim Densmore. I'm in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Do you need a full address for me?
No, that's good enough, Jim.
Yep. Just wondering about the assumption that getting to 82 helps. Were considerations given to the possibility that 82 isn't of assistance as an evacuation route? Is that a high or low probability thing?
Is that the extent of your comments or questions, Jim?
Oh, the rest concern the airport, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Terry, do you have a quick answer to that?
Yeah, I'll make a quick answer. You know, if 82 isn't the 82 is our only real route out of the community. You know, when we looked at, you know, 4 mile and 3 mile, you know, if we can't have a mass evacuation on 82, you know, there's really no route west on either one of those corridors. And so I guess I don't know of any other way to think about it. So yeah, I mean, if you've got any great ideas, I'm certainly open to suggestions, but that's my thoughts.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it. Ernie, I think you're unmuted. Are you able to comment?
Yes, yes, sir. Thank you so much. Ernie Morello, 848 Del Rio Road out of the Springs. Can you hear me okay?
Sure. What town did you say you're in?
I'm out of Peyton, Colorado.
Okay.
Just out the, yeah. Anyways, thank you so much. Outstanding presentation. And we can all agree that increased access to I-70 during emergency evacuation situations will save lives, especially given the nature of fires, how fast they move. Also proven is that the airport also critical assets support immediate responses, wildland firefighting, air outpatient recon efforts, and they're not incompatible. So I just wondering, looking at some of the proposals, has
I'm going
tunneling?
to ask you if you have comments on the airport to reserve those for when that.
Yeah, well, the comment I have for the evacuation route is wondering how much serious consideration is given towards meeting the requirement to be a tunneling rather than a bridge over the airport property. Because I think that would meet the requirements, and also there's additional advantages of far less long-term maintenance upkeep and less visual impact, and among other considerations.
Ernie, you're correct. The evacuation route works with a tunnel or without. The rate of evacuation isn't affected by tunnel or no tunnel.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, sir.
Thank you. And I'll reserve the rest of my comments about the airport and at the later conversation. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much, Ernie. Sorry to be short with you.
Mm-hmm. No worries.
I got a 619 number that I am unmuting now. Hello, 619. Okay, star 9, unmute you, 619. Okay, let's see. Rob Gavril.
Hello, Mayor and Council, men and women. Thank you very much for letting me speak. I just wanted to say one very quick thing. I'm on the Transportation Commission. As many of you know, I wanted to thank Terry personally and publicly for all the work she's done on this, and to let you all know that for the Transportation Commission's perspective, for the years I've been on it, 3 years now, Southbridge has been a #1 priority of us for the city. So from that perspective, we're supportive of the Southbridge concept and project, and very thankful for Terry's lead and moving it forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Okay, 619, have you been able to unmute yourself? Okay. Sorry, I know it's technologically challenging sometimes if you're not able to log into the Zoom call. If you're able to figure it out, 619, do me a favor and log back on, or maybe make a comment during the next presentation if you're able to figure that out. Davey, did we get to you, or did I just not lower your hands? No, we didn't get to Davey. Okay, Davey, your hand's still up. It looks like you're unmuted on our end. Okay. All right, Davey, and 619, I'm going to lower your hands and we'll come back to you. We'll be back to council for further discussion. This is just a presentation item, so there's no action required on this. Go ahead, Tony.
I just wanted to comment that I think this agenda is really confusing for people. I know these two issues are intertwined, but I think most of the people that you see there, Mr. Mayor, are here to discuss the airport issue. When I hear somebody from Colorado Springs concerned about planes also being an alternate for evacuation, I think we're a little off track. So I'd love for us to get back on track in the next section, because I think what most of the people, including Mr. Merritt, want to discuss is the airport shortening of the runway to accommodate Southbridge. And this, while it's a very important issue, is an ancillary issue to that. So I look forward to the next portion of this meeting. Thank you.
Thanks for that comment, Tony. I guess I'd respectfully disagree and say that the airport is an ancillary issue to saving lives, hundreds of lives. And I was pretty clear with all.
I understand that, Mr. Mayor, and I'd appreciate if you not, belittle me when I make a comment. I don't do that to you. Thank you.
Okay. Well, these are two separate agenda items, and I was very clear with the public that how we were going to be commenting on this and when they would be commenting, and it's really
and yet they were confused. So maybe next.
Okay. Well, we'll go on to the next item, the last item, the only other agenda item, so that no one is confused. Terry, are you presenting this next item?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Sorry, I should know how to do this after all this time, right? This is a discussion about the Glenwood Springs Municipal Airport. As the council knows, we have been thinking about ways to really reduce the cost of the project. And so initially, as many people know, what was evaluated in the Southbridge environmental assessment is a tunnel. And the tunnel was evaluated so that the runway could exist at its current length of 3,305 feet. We have spent a fair amount of time thinking about how the tunnel would work. This tunnel is our current design. You can see that we're including radiuses to get gasoline trucks and things back over to the FBO and to our fuel farm, which is just immediately to the north of this sketch or the site. We have considered, trying to reduce the overall project costs, and the tunnel is about $6 million of the overall project cost. And one of the ways to reduce the cost is to, eliminate the tunnel and cut through the runway. You can see this dashed line here represents the limits of grading, or what would happen if we, landed the bridge here on this bench and we continued our vertical curve back up to meet Airport Road, that exists today. In this agenda, we're going to look closely at the runway itself and all of the different options to potentially shorten the runway. Our runway and our airport are a part of the CDOT aviation system plan. This is out of the CDOT aviation plan. It's an airport report card is what they call it. And in it, they have specifics about the Glenwood Springs Airport. The current runway length, CDOT objectives for the runway length, FAA objectives for the runway length, along with other aspects of our airport, hangar availability, car availability, those kinds of things, Jet A fuel availability. These are some of our, aspects of our airport that are good or, may need to have more work. As far as the runway length goes, there are 66 primary runways in the Colorado airport system. The shortest public use primary runways in the system are the Glenwood Springs Airport at 3,305 feet. Also the Haxton Municipal Airport at 3,860 feet. 51 runways in that 66 runway system measure at least 5,000 feet. And the reason for that benchmark is that it's generally considered an indicator of an airport's ability to accommodate many corporate aircraft. We wanted to evaluate what types of aircraft are currently based at our airfield, along with other types of aircraft that could come in. So we looked at what we believe were some of the based aircraft there. Some of these are specific to various owners that have craft at the airport. So you can see our current airport runway length is 3,305 feet. There are many of the aircraft that are currently based at our runway, are within our runway standard. One of our based aircraft is at least over that standard. And a little bit of information about how runway lengths are established. There are, a number of criteria that set, the operational criteria for an aircraft. One of the most important is the altitude of the airfield. One of the other most important criteria is the hottest month that planes can land there. So heat affects the landings of the aircraft. So those are kind of some of the more important criteria when evaluating, these aircrafts and the runway length. It doesn't mean, for instance, this aircraft, it usually is at our airfield. That it actually takes longer, or the runway length required for that aircraft is longer than our existing runway length. It means that there are some conditions, operating conditions for that aircraft where it would need to be diverted to another airport. If the temperature is too high, if there are, a lot of passengers on board, a lot of fuel on board, a lot of luggage or those kinds of things that would increase the weight of the aircraft. We have looked at the airport 3 different times over time. We looked at it, of course, in the Southbridge assessment, in our 2019 land use planning scenario, and in the 1999 airport layout plan. And all of these different planning documents we have never really evaluated a shortened runway. One of the reasons, the main reason why the airfield is as short as it is that we are really constrained on all sides, either by existing residential areas or by the water. There are many, or by existing roadway systems, there are many constraints that keep us from expanding the airfield. This is our current condition. These are some of the roadways that bound our current condition, or the proposed roadway that that would go through the airfield. Sorry. This is our first option, or actually, let me move to this. This is our first option on reducing the runway length to avoid the extra cost associated with the tunnel. In this option, you can see that we would just take length off of the southern end. The length, again, the current length is 3,305 feet. This scenario would result in an airfield that would be 2,882 feet. We have estimated costs to alter the airfield. In this case, we're moving, this end up here, and then we're moving the lights and restriping, those kinds of things. We're also adjusting the grade of the airfield a little. It was estimated at $352,000 roughly to adjust it. And what we don't know about this design is, how that would affect the airspace around it. So to really assess whether this is a viable option, we would need to go ahead and assess the airspace that surrounds it to look for objects that would interfere. Another option that was developed is this option, option 2. In this case, we both shorten the runway and we extend the runway, moving it a little bit further to the north. So again, the current length is 3,305 feet. In this case, the runway length would be reduced to 3,262 feet. So a relatively small change, a higher price just for the construction. And again, we would need to evaluate the airspace around this changed condition to make sure that this really was operational. These are our current project costs. I think the council has seen these in the past, but we are including the tunnel, where the current cost of the project is $56.7 million. And without the tunnel, it is able to be reduced to about $50.7 million. These are the costs of some of the phases that are involved. We are working quickly towards trying to complete the design. We did complete our environmental assessment. We are likely to be delayed on our final design, at least until the fall right now, but we're still working as quickly as we can. So with that, I think I will open it up to questions. These, I guess, just to reinforce what we heard earlier, we are in progress, on this federal BRIC grant, and hoping that we will hear back something from the BRIC grant in June of this year. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, several questions. Paula and then Charlie.
The cost that you spoke to on shortening the runway, did that include the assessment of airspace, or is that an additional cost?
We need to add that as an additional cost. Jacobs is still putting together a final amendment for this project, and that airspace analysis will be included.
Do you have a rough idea of what that would be?
I don't right now.
Millions?
No. Less than 100,000, less than 50.
Okay, that helps. And in reading through this stuff, somebody mentioned some 2006 federal funding that might inhibit us moving forward on some of these options. Is that the case, or can you clarify on that, what that person was referring to?
We have met at least twice now with Scott Story, the CDOT aviation planner, and my understanding of their contributions to any airport is that we have, and I believe it's 5 years, where that improvement needs to stay in place. And if it doesn't stay for 5 years, then we have to reimburse them for their investment in our airport. So that's my understanding. I'll try to clarify that, but my recollection was that it was 5 years, a 5-year term on those investments.
Okay. And then last question, sorry to keep going. You had mentioned we'd finished the EA, but if we go to the scenario of shortening and lengthening,
will we have to revisit the EA?
We will. There's a process called a reevaluation, and it's much less intensive than the environmental assessment itself. They can usually be done with just a letter, but we, because of the interest in the tunnel or no tunnel, there may be a public meeting that would be involved, but a much smaller process than we've already been through.
All right, thanks, Terry.
You're welcome.
Charlie.
Thanks. Terry, can you go back to the slide about the aircraft at the airport and the length they need to? Maybe you said this and I missed it. How many of these exist at the airport now?
So these are what we believe are some of the based aircraft. We have tried to get a list of the aircraft. It has been harder to get all of the based aircraft. We did try to base this analysis on some of the heavier planes that we were aware of.
Okay, the second question I have is underneath the ones that are based. Now I see that, I apologize. Typical emergency service, the next one's down. None of those can currently land. We can't fly someone else in and out on an emergency basis, medical emergency, is that right?
Well, there was, when Amy Helm was the airport manager, she did say that there was, a once a year occurrence of a flight from Children's Hospital landing here. And we have tried to verify that and haven't been able to, get from Children's Hospital. But because we wanted to include that that analysis here, we were at least able to verify the two types of planes that they fly into other airports.
So I guess my kind of follow-up question then is if somebody now needs to be flown out versus by helicopter, do they take them to Eagle or Rifle and fly them out of there? Is that what they do?
I wonder if there's anybody from Classic Air Medical, but my understanding was that there were just a few conditions where you would want to transport on a fixed wing versus a helicopter, and that most conditions, would go out through just the helicopter service, Classic Air Medical, but some medical conditions that would want a fixed wing.
Okay, thanks.
Shelley.
Carrie, thank you. Could you go back to I think it's your final slide, or the one that was up that shows the bridge and the airport alignment?
So one of the options, Shelley?
Yeah, I guess so, one of the options. And I really appreciate this analysis that's been done, for shortening the runway, just because the $6 million to tunnel under the runway is a very steep price. And I think we would have a hard time as a council justifying that without further analysis or justification of how we can justify that type of cost to put a tunnel under the runway. And so I appreciate these as options because they could save us $6 million. But I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit. I asked you a question, and I was actually out at the airport this afternoon, just walking and talking to some people and trying to get an idea of what their questions might be for, are there other scenarios to try to avoid the tunnel, but also maybe not impact the runway so much? Mm-hmm. So, and I think you showed me an option that had been at least looked at by one of the consultants. So yeah. I'm wondering, is that, if we were to try to evaluate other designs that might do that, can you explain a little bit about where we are with the EA right now, how long it took us to get there? And, we have a bridge alignment right now that it's really aligned well to go across the river perpendicularly. And I remember discussion as being part of this EA process way early on about, you know, you certainly want to minimize the length of the bridge because that's the really expensive part, not to mention the tunnel, but.
Yeah.
So if we were, you know, it's been suggested that, well, can we possibly realign the bridge a little bit? What would that do to our approval of the EA at this point in the process? And what, you know, I'm just curious, what type of a delay we'd be looking at?
Well, you know, just the part of the reason that the bridge is aligned like it is here in this sketch was to really minimize the land take between Holy Cross and the whole Jackson Ranch. You know, this alignment essentially runs right up the property line between the two. And, you know, during the environmental assessment, both uses were deemed important. You know, the Jackson Ranch from a working ranch standpoint, from a wildlife corridor, from a wetland standpoint, you know, all of those uses were evaluated and deemed important to preserve.
Right.
You know,
and it's now under conservation easement, I believe.
That's true.
That part of the ranch, yes.
Yeah. So could we, you know, what would it do to the EA if we wanted to shift? It would depend, you know, if we were going to skew the bridge, you know, in a different direction. You know, I think that kind of skew would really just result in, you know, design delay and additional costs. We would essentially be redesigning the bridge to accommodate that. And then, you know, the idea of shifting around the airport, you know, trying to look at other alignments that wouldn't affect the airport, but may, you know, have other effects in the project. You know, this is just a sheet from our environmental assessment. You know, 33 options were looked at. You can see this light purple line is the option that we essentially have. So they did look at, you know, all of these different purple alignments. They looked at shifting it further to the south, you know, trying to go further south around the Jackson Ranch. You know, there were additions from 4 Mile, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of
remember that well. Yes, I was actually on the part of that citizen action group and part of the Transportation Commission and looking at those scenarios. So it was a very involved and detailed process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But could it be done? Yes. Yeah, it's just time and money.
But time and money is important, and especially with your previous presentation. How much approximately do we have into design right now?
On the order of about $4 million.
Okay. Okay. I think helps answer that a lot, because the scenario that you have on the screen right now doesn't seem to really affect the length of the runway at all.
You know, this was to address comments from Steve Shute, who's on the airport board. Right. He was asking about the idea of, first of all, shifting the bridge, this end of the bridge, further to the south. So, you know, redesigning the bridge. But if that couldn't be, he wanted to look at the idea of, you know, changing the radius of the road, trying to, you know, in his sketch, he had a radius that actually went out here and then rejoined over here. Okay. And we did, from an engineering standpoint, take a quick look at that idea, and we laid out horizontal curves that met our speed, our high, or, you know, the posted speed will be 25 miles an hour. In this analysis, we used a speed of up to 35 miles an hour. But, you know, the horizontal curves just won't work to try to bring it like this and come back. The curves are too tight for use. Okay.
And one last question, sorry. In the scenarios where we look at shortening the runway, you talked about analyzing it, airport function from the standpoint of the airspace and everything. What about, is there any plan to do kind of the commission and the airport group have been asking to do an airport plan for a while? I'm just curious if we're going to go to all this trouble and actually shorten the runway and impact the airport in that way, would we be looking at doing an airport plan to go along with that? Has there been a discussion about that?
You know, Shelley, we did do have that Gruen and Gruen study that analyzed the airport just from an economic standpoint. And in that Gruen and Gruen study, they looked at, you know, what we could do to make this the best little airport on the western slope. They added, you know, hangar space around the airport, and they, you know, added a new fuel system, which we need, and they looked at those kinds of improvements to, you know, to bring in more people and increase the economic viability of the airport. But what they didn't do was to look at it really from a flight standpoint, and from a future use standpoint. You know, Paula has asked a couple of really good questions in the past. She has asked, you know, what would, if we shorten the runway, you know, what does it mean for the future? You know, can aircraft, you know, land, you know, would it be appealing to people in the future? You know, would we be increasing the value of our airport?
Right,
And,
that's kind of my question. Yep.
And, you know, I've gotten two answers to that. So I'm going to give you both.
Okay.
You know, I have heard both from Scott Story, the CDOT aviation planner, and from the person that we've been working with at Jacobs, that, you know, overall small plane ownership is declining. You know, it's expensive to own and maintain a plane like that, and the trends are declining. However, there is a class of planes that are lightweight and easier to operate, and there is, you know, some change in the market and use of, or, you know, crafts and use. And he said that, you know, we would need more analysis to really understand those kinds of changes. So it wasn't really very helpful, but it is one of those things that we could look at if we did an economic study of the airport.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Terry.
Other questions? I have a question, just maybe a clarification. So we're talking about the three options being shorten the runway by about 300 feet for a cost of $350,000, shorten the runway by approximately 42 feet for $480,000, $483,000, and continue with the tunnel at a cost of $6 million. Am I correct in summarizing those options?
Yes, but I would add that, you know, without the airspace analysis, we can't guarantee that these will work. You know, there are probably things that if we found out that there was an airspace problem, we might be able to change, but we haven't done that final step. But yes, in short, you're correct.
Okay. And I know it's going to come up in a question, but Carl, can you opine? I've seen this asked a number of times, and we just have a lot of attendees, and I'm sure one of them is going to be this. But can you opine on the deed restrictions that the original owner placed on this property when they deeded it over to the city to be an airport forever?
You mean the ones that there weren't any?
Okay.
We've done over the last 20 years, I've probably done 3 analysis on the title work to the airport, including the last one that was probably 400 pages of various documents. Lease agreements, hangar agreements, original transfers, all of those. And in none of those, with the exception of what Terry described in some of the CDOT aeronautical grants, were there any limitations on use of the property? And keeping in mind that underneath 2 of the scenarios that are being described, 3 scenarios being described this evening, it continues to operate as an airport. And so I don't know that that's really relevant tonight regardless.
Yeah. Thank you, Carl.
Mm-hmm.
Councilor Hershey.
I have a question for Terry, but I don't want her to answer it.
Okay.
Terry, how much would it cost if there wouldn't be any air analysis, we just build our South Bridge and that route, if we just close the airport down? And I asked that question because I think it's something we have to look at least in the future. Thank you.
So he said he didn't want you to answer, so I'm going to take him to Councilor Hershey at his word and move on to Ingrid.
Okay, my question is just clarity, especially with the fire mitigation dialogue we had in the last presentation. How much impact did the airport, how much did it help? How much money did that stream of revenue come from that as well? So kind of a two-part question.
Oh, I think, and Deborah, maybe you can help me with this a little bit. There was some revenue from the lease of the airport during the fire. And I can't remember, and maybe Steve remembers. Steve's got a good head for numbers.
Don't hold me to it, but I'm thinking around $100,000 if Steve does not have a better answer than me.
I believe it was $1,500 a day. That's my recollection of serving on the airport commission. But if Steve Boyd can jump in and has a much better recollection, I'm happy to hear it.
Yeah. So there was revenue from the use for the fire, I think the main operation of the fire, there weren't fixed wing aircraft landing here. As everyone saw, we ended up being a helicopter base, and with that helicopter base, the rest of the flights out were closed. There were no private flights out of here while it was operating as a fire base. So I guess that's good and bad. The idea of people escaping in their planes is probably not realistic if it's already operating as a fire base. It definitely had that use.
Okay, and then one follow-up question to that. Are there any firefighting specific fixed wing planes that can land on our airstrip the length that it is now and that are regularly used?
There was one plane that Gary asked us to evaluate, some sort of I can't remember, Gary used the term tractor plane. I didn't see the end result of that, but from at least the last occurrence that we had, I don't believe there was a fixed wing flight or aircraft that landed here.
Okay.
They came out of other airports.
Okay, so it's a pretty fair statement that it works very well for the helicopter pads and for the firefighting resources for the helicopter, the usage of that, but not for the fixed wing.
Yeah.
That's a fair statement. Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you everybody for patiently waiting by. We have 64 attendees. Hands are going up as I speak. I'm going to remind everybody, name, address as close as you can, or feel comfortable with. You don't have to use all 3 minutes. You're welcome to use as much as you can. We'll move on at 3 minutes. And if it's been said, you don't have to say it again. All right, with that, we'll just go down the line. And if you can't talk or there's some technical difficulty, I will try to remember to come back to you and people will help remind me if I miss up. So Mr. Brad Walker.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
You can, yes, sir.
Awesome. Good evening, members of the council. My name is Brad Walker. I live in the town of Superior, Colorado. I'm also a certificated pilot, an active member of Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. As a side note, let me say that the presentation Ms. Parch showed was fascinating. It's helpful for those of us who do not live in the area but do visit the area to better understand things. I wanted to provide some comments about proposed changes to the runway at Glenwood Springs. I would first like to remind the council this airport's part of the Colorado transportation infrastructure, so having someone comment from outside the area is justified. Having Mr. Hershey call out a Colorado citizen who might not live in the area in particular is not helpful. First, let me remind this council that according to Colorado Department of Transportation, Glenwood Springs Airport provides over $20 million in economic impact to the community. That's from CDOT. The airport also directly supports over 200 high-quality jobs. Some of those dollars have been contributed by me as I've flown into Glenwood Springs several times and spent my hard-earned money in the local community. Advocating for something as foolish as shortening the runway would have a very negative economic impact on the airport and the community. That is not something I would think your voting constituents would be happy to know about when considering the economic stress everyone is under due to the pandemic. In addition, I've looked at the official plan for the airport. The plans show a design of an underground tunnel, as you well know. I would strongly encourage the staff to shelve the idea of shortening the runway and continue with the official design of an underground tunnel at the end of the runway. The FAA has the means for providing the grant money to help with the construction of this project. While I respect Ms. Parch's desire to reduce costs, shortening the runway is not the proper avenue. Her presentation does not take into account the FAA grant process, and taking advantage of the FAA grant process would severely reduce the cost to the local community. Lastly, from discussing with friends who live in the area, I completely understand the importance of the South Bridge is to the community for development and safety. I would strongly encourage this council to return to the original plan of creating a tunnel underground the current runway as city staff has designed the plans for. This allows the town to provide for the South Bridge and keep the runway intact. This is a win for all parties involved. All the best, and thank you for the time. Respectfully, Brad Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Next, I'm going to try to go back down to this 619 number that I just wasn't able to negotiate last time. So 619, whoever you are, hold on a sec. Everything's moving around on me. 619. Can you hear us, or can you speak?
Okay.
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. 619.
All right, outstanding. Yes, name's Ernie Morello out of Peyton, Colorado. Flat is Meadow Lake Airport. And just to piggyback on other commenters and proposals been made, we all agree that the community needs to have access to I-70 in an emergency situation. And then the requirements and the objectives of Southbridge will help meet that. But we strongly recommend to tunnel under the runway rather than trying to do a bridge over it and shortening the runway. That'd be a lose-lose proposition in many ways. It makes the airport less viable, less safe, less useful, and also it limits the possibility of expanding its use to support the community for general aviation outreach, further use for search and rescue, fire air application and reconnaissance, all the things that serve the community in the region.
Oop, hello, sir.
So can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
So that's my So strongly recommend go with the tunnel aspect of it. That answers the mail on the emergency egress for people on the west side of the valley there to get to the I-70, and also remains viability of the airport. General aviation airports, network airports out of CDOT, they're not meant to serve commercial aviation or any of that. They're meant to serve the community, from being a resource to people in the community who want to learn to fly, to source for further their STEM education, to provide more means for other people in general aviation to come and access and enjoy the community. All these things, in addition to the emergency aspect of it, will further really it's a benefit for Gulch Springs. The airport is a blessing, and I think to know that and to make it fully useful and ensure its future for the community and the possibilities it holds is something you should look at too. Not just a knee-jerk where we need to serve the constituency that need to get to the highway and we need to chop up the airport to serve that. Doesn't need to happen. Yes, a tunnel may be more expensive initially, but long-term, tunnels are also less maintenance intensive. And given the price of steel and construction materials, the construction upkeep of the bridge may prove to be more costly than the original estimate. So just something I'd like you to keep that in mind also. And I'll just yield the rest of my time to the other people who probably want to pipe in on the airport, but really appreciate the presentation. We understand the concerns and what you're dealing with, and we're not competing constituencies. Let us be part of the solution. Let us help you get a solution that not only meets the current needs, but also help build and grow the future of the community as well. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for those comments. Scott Story. Scott Story, are you with us? Bottom left is unmute. Okay. Scott, will come back to you. Chris Romaine.
Mr. Mayor, can you hear me now?
Is this Scott Story?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Story, yes, we can. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and privileged to be here with the City Council. The only reason I'm, chiming in is I just want to make a point of clarification. And I appreciate the engineer's description of the challenges and the design for the bridge and the airport. But I would just point out the fact that the grant that was issued by the state in 2014 has a lifespan similar to that of the improvements made, which under federal law is about 15 years for a runway rehab versus 20 years for a runway repavement. So that I just wanted to correct that fact and make that known that instead of 5-year lifespan, it's 15 years from the state grant. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Story. All right, Miss Romaine. Thought I was talking to Rebecca. Chris, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
My name is Chris Romaine. I live on Colorado Road in Glenwood Springs, and my house backs up to the airport. First, I'd like to compliment Terry and city staff for the excellent work that they did on both the fire hazard analysis as well as the runway alternatives assessment. I think it's important to point out Terry's comment that what we have done so far to this date is spent time and money, apparently up to $4 million. I think it's important to note that I've lived in this house for 15 years, and a number of years ago, we did go through the EA process. It was a public process. We had an opportunity to participate as a community. A lot of money was spent, a decision was made, and I feel it's inappropriate for the city council to now be going back on that work. One of the issues that has not been discussed today is the safety of the cars that are passing by the airport, which was a topic in the environmental assessment. And that was one of the reasons why the cut and cover was included, because if a plane crashes on the bridge, it just bounces down the runway. If it lands short, it doesn't land on a car. I'm a little afraid, and I appreciate the comments from those people that are out of town that utilize the airport. But I'm a little afraid that this sort of action by the city council, if they move forward with it, is going to be death by 1,000 cuts for the airport, which is, as we've heard, a tremendous asset, significant financial contributor to the community. And I believe, if I understand things correctly, it's one of the few departments of the city that actually pays for itself and doesn't require any tax money, but perhaps city council can correct me on that topic. One of the questions that I had, the last comment I had is that having lived on the airport for 15 years, I can tell you that fixed wing firefighting aircraft have landed here. They are referred to as seats, and they are akin to a crop duster, not a tractor. And in fact, they have been at this airport a number of times over the years. So just to be clear, the airport does function for fixed wing firefighting aircraft. My last question for Terry is, do the costs associated with the alternatives of removing the bridge include the costs of just the runway, or do they also include the costs of relocating all of the buildings and businesses and infrastructure that are in the buildings that are showing being moved? And again, I thank you for your time and your work.
Thanks, Krish. Appreciate those comments. White Brooks.
Hi, Jonathan, can you hear me?
We can hear you great, Mr. Brooks.
All right. Hi, my name is Watts. I am a local student and aviation. I've been pursuing aviation since pretty much I was 3, and I've grown up around the Glenwood Airport. And I just wanted to stress the importance of this airport and how it can be used for many things. And I feel like one of the big issues with the city is they've been fighting this airport for a long time, and instead of promoting it. And I feel like the possibilities of this airport are fairly endless, including from an educational standpoint and other standpoints as well. But shortening the runway would limit a lot of those things, including larger aircraft such as like Pilatus PC-12s and King Airs. They can land here on occasion, but obviously or shortening the runway has a huge economic impact on those types of aircraft and those owners. And I feel like, from my standpoint, I feel like sorry, I'm mumbling, but there's a lot of importance to promoting the airport instead of fighting it. And I feel like this has been there's always been an effort to take out the airport, especially with the development the residential development a few years ago. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. Appreciate that perspective. Dave Merritt.
There we go. Had to light up my microphone there. Yeah, my name is David Merritt. I've lived off of the north end of the runway since 1985, and I'm chair of the Airport Commission currently. The concerns that the Airport Commission has, and this is the concerns that I have, came up late in the process. This idea of dropping the tunnel was just put on the table, by an outside individual in December of last year. We really haven't had time to fully evaluate it. Yes, this is the shortest runway in Colorado. The next shortest one, Haxton, is nearly 2,000 feet lower in elevation, which has a big impact on the need for the length of the runway. The airport is land constrained, and by shortening this, we have cut off the south bit of the airport, which we've targeted for moving the helicopter operations down there. We have 2 buildings there currently. We have a hangar for about 10 planes. We also have a maintenance facility. Costs of relocation of these are not considered at all in any cost savings. The maintenance facility is a private business that is extremely busy folks will fly in to have their aircraft maintained here. Losing these would be a significant problem. Getting the Pilates in checked, and Pilates have flown in here a number of times. We do have a photograph of one that was here flying for Children's in February of 2019. That east landing of the bridge, a concern of mine, and we're looking at the current layout here, appears to impact upon Holy Cross Energy's solar array that they have put out there and impact the operations they have on the south end of their area. So that may need to be reevaluated because it's not currently on the plans that have been forecast there. The fire operations last year were about $100,000 contract with the Forest Service and the BLM. The 1,500 was per helicopter per day. That was the rate on that. And the need for, it wasn't just a helipad. With about 10 or 12 helicopters there, they were strung out along the entire length of the runway with their own mobile flight tower that they brought in for this. So this airport is extremely important to the community, and we need to preserve this. We're going to drop the tunnel. We need to reevaluate what the impacts really were on this. That north end into the community, we need to coordinate with the residents that live out there. The new airspace may impinge upon buildings that are there. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Dave Merritt and Chris Romine are both local residents of South Glenwood and my neighbors. So just for context, Gary Vick, what say you? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Have I unmuted myself?
You
I
are.
think I have. I would just like to say that we can have both the airport and Southbridge. I think everybody agrees that we need Southbridge, and by the same token, the airport is a huge asset to the community. And I have to object, Mr. Mayor, to your characterization of trading lives for the airport. I think you misspoke. Maybe you can go over that at the end of the presentation. I think we can have both. You've got an option 10 that shows a cut and cover under the runway. You have an option 16 in the EI, in the environmental study, which was originally deleted, but it shows a nice roadway around to the south of the runway, as does option 2 that Terry presented. It shows some roads going around to the south of the runway.
Mr. Vicky cut out real quick.
I'm sorry, did I lose you?
For the last probably 4 seconds of your comment.
Oh, okay. It's just that we can have roads around the south end of the airport and a south bridge and an airport too. I have to say, you know, having watched some of the other council members, I have to comment on, I think Shelley is ostensibly concerned about the $6 million cost of the tunnel. But I think she's ignoring the fact that that's 10% of the project, and to have a good city costs money. I think what Shelley really wants is to kill the airport with 1,000 cuts so she can have the land to put condos on it. But we'll talk about that another time. We've got to look at all the options, not just the ones that have been proposed recently. I proposed looking at option 16 in the EIA report in December, and Shelley flushed it. She told me everything that could be looked at had been looked at, except, of course, the one that she wanted to look at, which is to do away with the cover and just run the road across the runway, and also to shorten the runway. And I think Watts Brooks makes a great comment. The city has never explored, ever, the possibility of getting federal funding for this airport. I've read the rules. I'm one of the few people on the call that has. And I can tell you that if we push for it, we've got a pretty good chance of getting some funding for the airport. Classic Air Med has offered to build an FBO for the airport. And between these two things, we can make this airport great. I can go on forever, but you're going to cut me off.
Yes, I will. Just very quickly, we do have a $31 million federal FEMA brick grant that is out. So we have, for all the people who are suggesting that we do grants, we are doing them. Amy Helm.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
We can, yes, Amy.
Okay, hi, Amy Helm, former airport manager, current location, Nelson, New Zealand. So, hello, council and city management. First, I do want to say thank you to Terry and everyone else for just continuing to work with the airport board and the stakeholders to try find a solution that can work for everybody. But I just want to use my couple minutes to clear up some questions that council had after Terry's presentation. The first being that the emergency medical aircraft that fly into our airport, yes, according to the statistics on that page, the runway is not long enough, but it comes down to, density, altitude, how the conditions are that day, and the experience of the pilot. And so we do have emergency medical aircraft in a PC-12 or a King Air that come in multiple times a year. And I've spoken with the pilots of those, Children's Hospital, Flight for Life, couple of different organizations. And, we are visual flight only, so they can only come in on the days where it's best, but they would come in more, they said. They just need a larger space off of the airport to turn their airplane around. That's the only reason why they don't use our airport more. And that issue was brought up in October when the airport board had a meeting with city council and requested to get additional pavement in field by the Sopris Aviation hangar, one for the emergency medical helicopters, but two, that additional pavement would allow for more Flight for Life aircraft to come in. Secondly, the heli base for the Grizzly Creek fire, the airport was closed for 2 weeks, and during those 2 weeks, we had 9 aircraft staged there. It was $1,500 a day while the airport was closed, but it was also an additional $500 a day per aircraft. We did open the aircraft or the airport back up after 2 weeks and still had 6 helicopters based there, totaling $3,000 a day while the airport was open. So it is possible to have emergency fire helicopters and the aircraft open at the same time. And you can contact the Colorado Department of Fire and Prevention and talk to them about their SEATS aircraft that we've actually had on display at the Aviation Expo. Looks like I'm out of time, but thank you for all your work.
Amy, thank you for calling in at 3:06 a.m. from New Zealand. I appreciate that.
It's actually the afternoon, but
3:06 p.m. I mean, sorry.
Yeah. And I'm available. If you have more questions, just, reach out. I do have a comprehensive history of, the last 4 years I was working there. So
thanks, Amy. Appreciate your participation still in the airport commission. All right. Next, let's see. And please, can we get back to folks' name, address, place of residence, and Gary Vick was, I don't know if he did or not, but he is a Glenwood Springs resident who lives right off of Midland and 8th Street. Greg, you are.
Hello, Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the time, council. I would, it's Greg Knott, 4118 Sky Ranch Drive, Glenwood Springs here. We built our house in Park East 15 years ago. And we built this house for a specific reason, for the views of Sopris. Sopris is a predominant view out the back of our home. But with that, I also understand that we need a secondary emergency access egress to Highway 82 in emergency situations. As we've moved through this process, the tunnel under the airport has been more appealing because it's going to cut across our view plane up the Roaring Fork Valley to Sopris. And it's been sold as that. Now we're changing the game. We're changing the game to run the road across the top of the hill over to 82, which is going to impact our views of Sopris. I consider that a taking, and I consider that as an affront to what we've done. I have been to the charrettes, I've been to the design review, I've asked from staff on multiple occasions, please tell me where this road is going to run and what it's going to do to our view plane. I understand the necessity for it. I understand the need for it. And I'm not fighting that in no mean. But if we're looking at $6 million cost savings to the town of, or the city of Glenwood Springs, what is the impact to the homeowners on the river and their property values. I think there's a huge impact that is not being considered. So that's my first comment. My second comment is I've lived here for 15 years. I've seen fixed wing aircraft come in from other areas for medical reasons. If staff needs assistance contacting Children's Hospital to get data, I am more than willing to do that. I'm more than willing to step up, help you out, and get that data because I personally observed those flights. I think changing the game this late in the process and staff's inability or unwillingness to contact me with information is inappropriate. And I will leave it at that. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, council. And I look forward to further conversations.
Thank you, Mr. Knott. Joe Mueller.
Good evening. Can you hear me, Jonathan?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. I appreciate the opportunity here before council. My name is Joe Mueller. I live on Huminger Drive in West Bank Mesa. I'm a 20-year resident at that particular property, 30-year resident in the valley. Recently, have petitioned to join the airport board, and I believe the voting on that will occur in a week or so from now. I'm a recent pilot, still in training, and very close to getting my pilot certificate. So this being recent, my interest in the South Bridge has really changed from previous, where I really didn't care much. 20 years ago, it would have been great when my kids were going to Sopris Elementary to have that bridge, but that's long gone. And so anyway, just a few comments. The slide for the runway length appears to be misleading to the public, as there are numerous aircraft that use the current runway that clearly don't need the links shown on that slide. And so I don't believe that's really a truthful way of representing what aircraft need to land there. And I think the city should just go out and ask the airport users, what aircraft are there? And all of them are using the current runway. So that's one of the things. Secondly, another point is the current options, 1 or 2, eliminate the maintenance facility, which is a vital part to this airport. And perhaps the city was going to relocate that, but I don't see that in the current plan. I'm happen to be training out of the Eagle facility, but the airplanes I'm training in are all maintained in the Glenwood maintenance facility. And so I believe that's very important. We try to keep that as part of the airport operations. One of the comments I have is we're representing options here to the general public that haven't been fully addressed, particularly the airspace. And that doesn't seem to be a great way to represent things when, you know, we have unknowns about airspace use. If we're lengthening the runway or moving it here or there, that seems, that needs to be addressed before options are even presented. And then lastly, I wasn't aware, but perhaps the FAA will cost share with improvements related to the South Bridge that affect the airport. And if the city hasn't looked into FAA cost sharing, why not? And would they be willing to pursue that? I yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mueller. Bill Dirge, you're up next.
Hello, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir.
I am Bill Dirge. I'm from Elbert, Colorado, just to the northeast of Colorado Springs. I'm an aircraft owner, and I fly my airplane specifically to Glenwood Springs for the maintenance facility on the south end of the airfield. I just want to throw my hat in the ring of this maintenance facility provides me with services that I can't find anywhere within 500 miles of anywhere in Colorado. And I believe that shortening the runway length would limit my abilities to fly into Glenwood on the days in the summertime, or really basically any time other than the really cold times of the year. I think that it would be a short-sighted attempt to make adjustments that would have long lasting consequences if you runway length and eliminate the ability to arrive on warmer days of the year. That's all I really had to say, and I wanted to keep it brief. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. Mr. Rodriguez.
Ricky's muted, Mr. Mayor.
Ricky, bottom left-hand side.
Hello.
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Hello. How's it going?
Fantastic.
Okay, so my name's Ricky Rodriguez. My address is 1116 Waltz Avenue. I was born here. I lived most of my life here in Glenwood. During that time, I believe the fixture, the airport has been a fixture here in Glenwood. I want to go on record to say that I'm against any projects that will put the Glenwood Airport at risk, including shortening the runway. To the contrary, I would like to see the Glenwood Airport be all that it can be. I shouldn't need to remind you all that our airport has played an instrumental role twice in the last few years in saving our valley from fires. Last summer, the Glenwood Canyon fire was only one drainage from making it into the northern part of the city. The helicopters coming from out of the Glenwood Springs Airport were able to make a short route, much less time that would have been required from another location. Glenwood has to make a serious attempt to get federal funds. Deborah's really good at that. On the surface, our airport may not qualify for federal funding, but if you read further down in the regulations, there are exceptions to this disqualification. The airport serves as a firefighting base for the National Forest Service as well. The second exception is if the airport serves as a critical transportation need. I believe Classic Air qualifies as a critical transportation service. I urge the council to evaluate other alternatives that do not put the airport at risk. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Jay Andrews.
Yes, hello. My name is Jay Andrews, and I'm a resident of Edwards, Colorado. I'm at 931 Singletree Road. I'm a licensed pilot and a member of Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, Colorado Pilots Association, and the Experimental Aircraft Association, which has a chapter in Glenwood Springs. This past summer, Glenwood Airport was absolutely vital to the firefighters during the worst Colorado fire season record. The airport was home to the firefighting aircraft during this time, and they refueled there. They tied down there for the night, and the availability of this airport helped to save lives and property due to its proximity to these fires. Chief Tillotson and the members of the council mentioned how valuable the airport was during those recent firefighting operations. Shortening the runway length would diminish the effectiveness and usefulness of the airport. Other bridge alternatives could offer the same sort of similar route for evacuation while preserving the runway length. I don't live in Glenwood Springs, but I do fly out of the Eagle Airport, which is the closest airport to Glenwood Springs, and I've flown there many occasions. Good landing alternatives during an in-flight emergency in the Rocky Mountains are few and far between. And Glenwood Airport is uniquely located right in the middle of three other airports, Eagle, Aspen, and Rifle airports. And it's a good emergency landing spot for small aircraft flying out of each of these airports. Glenwood Airport is in the bottom of a canyon, which you all know, and it can make it more challenging than some of the airports because of the 5,900-foot elevation. And it requires more runway than airports that are at lower elevations. And it's worse on hot days with high density altitude. Shortening the runway would endanger the lives of pilots that are flying into and out of the airport. Again, I mentioned I fly out of the Eagle Airport, and I spoke to the owner of Alpine Aviation, who owns several aircraft based out of Eagle. And he said that he has all of his maintenance done at Glenwood Airport for all the aircraft. And he also mentioned that other aircraft owners do the same. Losing the maintenance facility there would be a huge blow to the general aviation aircraft owners in the surrounding area. City Council seems to think that the only users of the airport and its facilities are the small number of aircraft that rent hangars there. In reply to the statement regarding fixed-wing firefighting aircraft, the Air Tractor is a brand of aircraft that is used for firefighting operations, and they are quite capable of operating into and out of the existing runway length. Shortening the runway length is a short-sighted approach that endangers the life of people who fly in and out of the airport. Preserving the airport also preserves part of Glenwood history. The Post-Independent said in a June 2012 article that the Glenwood Airport is presumed to be the 4th oldest in the country. I'd submit that that's part of Glenwood's heritage, and I would request that the council keep the airport at its existing length and look at the other alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Andrew. Merrily Rippey. Merrily Rippey.
Hi. I was just trying to make a better look at my notes because some of these people are really much more organized than I am. But what I would like to talk about is about process, not so much as the particulars of this.
Rippey.
In that historically, this has been going on for years, but there were 32 original options offered. And now suddenly a 33rd option is appearing. And from a process standpoint, that doesn't sit very well with me. And Shelley said she was in on that original environmental work, and that the decision for this option was made not because it was the cheapest, but because, looking at my notes here, of trying to make some reconciliation with the Jacksons and Holy Cross about the landings. And I haven't ever heard in any of these conversations about whether the Jackson family, now that this is in conservation easement, is on board with this. And also, as regard to the cheapest, we're talking only about this portion here, the amount of a cut and cover, as opposed to just shortening the airport. When the intersection with Highway 82, I remember that this is pretty problematic and that there's a lot of money being expended there. And there was, that's about all. I just think that from a process standpoint, I'm the ultimate Pollyanna, and I believe that when you're given this opportunity, maybe it's a time to go back. If you're looking for the cheapest option, go back to all 32 of them and look for cheap and see what you come up with, but don't go for option number 33. Thanks, I'll yield my time, bye.
Thanks, Councilor Hershey, did you have something you wanted to? Okay, sorry, your hand got up. Merrily Rippey, I'm assuming from the
yes, I live at 213 Creekside Court in West Glenwood, and our house has been in the 96 fire. It was slurried, and in the 2002 fire, we were evacuated for several days. And my suggestion for anybody that's living in 4 Mile or anywhere else is make sure you do the fire protection on your home because it saved our house. Thanks a ton.
Thank you much. Stephanie Stenfield, our newest applicant for the Air Force Commission. Stephanie, bottom left.
I did that, but you muted me back.
I'm sorry. It's a weird thing. I have fat fingers. Sometimes I try to unmute and ask for unmute. So I think I've done that to a few people.
Okay. Stephanie Stanfield, 3900 Old Lodge Road, longtime resident, lived right watching airplanes fly over today because of the wind. I was on the airport board many years ago and chairman of the airport board during the election to keep the airport. I learned a lot in those times. First of all, the current council may not be aware, but Mid-Continent Coke and Coal has a hangar out at the airport, and they regularly flew a King Air in and out of the airport all the time, 5 days a week, full-time pilot. So King Airs can land safely even in the summer. The second is that I have watched different options for this runway come out throughout the years. And when they had a land use compatibility study done, it was back when I was chairman. And what happened at a recent pilot meeting here at Sopris Elementary was the city trotted out this old land use compatibility study as a brand new study with the same recommendations. And the new one didn't show Sucrus Elementary. It didn't show the storage hangars. It didn't show all the compatible uses that happened back 20 years ago. So the city has a lot of information that is still relevant. It may not be current, but you don't need to do a whole new study every time the word airport is mentioned. I was chairman when we repaid the airport. A lot of navigable easements and things like that were looked at. When the cell tower went in at the north side of the runway, airport space was evaluated, and a lot of that hasn't changed. The options that were presented were the tunnel, and when I was at the last airport board meeting as a visitor, it wasn't included, and we were given only 2 options. And I had not seen the third one at all. So I'm wondering how this game of shuffleboard for how to manage the runway is being played, first of all. And second of all, I know that a lot of the cars, which we will increase the traffic down there, are not aware of what airplanes need to land and take off. And there's a potential concurrence of airport and car at the same time that wouldn't exist if there was a tunnel. I think for safety reasons, I think for maintaining the pristine nature of our valley and keeping the runway length the way it is, the tunnel is one of the best options out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stanfield. I think you just won the award for the exact amount of time.
My Toastmasters training comes in good.
All right, Mr. Stephen Shute, I think you were actually referred to as a member of the Airport Commission. Just for clarification, you're not a member of the Airport Commission, but a longtime airport user. Your son, Joel, is on the Airport Commission. But go ahead.
There we go. Yes, that's correct. I was on the Airport Commission for about 10 years and was chairman for about 5 years. Steve Shute from Sunny Acres in West Glenwood. I completely support the South Bridge evacuation route and an excellent presentation by Terry. I lived in Oak Meadows and Glenwood Park for more than 20 years. I've been a pilot for more than 45 years, and my son Joel flies with me. He's also a pilot. I've flown out of Glenwood Springs for about 22 years. I'm an engineer, but also a business owner. I operate a string of multiple little utilities all over in places that are very rural and you can't fly commercially to there. So we depend on our aircraft for our business. When the South Bridge first came out, I went to many public meetings, dozens. I was on the Airport Commission. I was chairman. But it seemed like the design for the airport tunnel was just cast in stone. It showed up in the very earliest drawings, and there was no great reason. It really wasn't a very good alignment. In fact, of the 23 alignments, it was never studied to just go straight across the river and sort of go around the south end of the runway and miss the runway. It was just sort of a gun to the head to go right through the runway, ostensibly to close the airport. And so because out of the 23, you didn't take the obvious option of just going straight ahead and tying into Airport Road on a 90-degree angle instead of a 200-mile-an-hour curve. It would arguably make the EA, the environmental assessment, invalid because they didn't even look at one of the most obvious alignments. Terry showed it a little bit, but it wasn't exactly what I proposed. I proposed moving the west end only, not the east end, the west end only of the bridge about 80 feet south along the same bench that you're landing on now. So it really doesn't change the geology or anything about the design of the bridge. It just makes it about 6 feet longer. So my question to the council is, when you approved $75,000 recently to redesign the roads in lieu of a tunnel to save $6 million, would you now consider spending $75,000 or so to reevaluate the cost of shifting the bridge a few degrees and 80 feet south to save the airport, not just $6 million? And that's my question to the council.
Thank you, Mr. Shute. Jim Densmore, excuse me, from Colorado Springs.
Yes, sir. I am still from Colorado Springs. I'm a pilot. I'm an airplane owner, AOPA, EAA member. Please let me add my enthusiastic support for the airport for retaining the runway at least its current length and maintaining or even enhancing it per other comments that have already been made. And I, of course, don't need to duplicate those comments. Through my organization, the International 185 Club, I developed and held a fly-in and breakfast at your airport in 2019. And it was a great success. We did some business with city businesses, and I hope everyone thought it was a win-win. That's all I wanted to say. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Densmore. Sean Thomas. Mr. Thomas, bottom left unmute button. There you go.
Gotcha. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you for your time. And Shelley, just want to say, not Shelley, I'm sorry, Terry, great job on that presentation you put on earlier. That obviously took a lot of work. I think we've heard a lot of talk about the airport. I think what we should be talking about is construction. And, you know, there's obviously an estimated $6 million cost. What's the reality of that? And do we have good engineering numbers? And are they estimates? And let's see those numbers. You know, I think clearly the best alternative is the tunnel. And we're talking about a 10% cost increase. What do we overrun on the Grand Avenue Bridge? What are we overrunning on the 27th Street Bridge? And I wouldn't be very surprised if we're 5 to 10% over the actual estimated cost of those projects. So I think that's something City Council should look at and say, okay, well, there's the reality at the end of the day. This is what we overran. And so, hey, we might be 10% on this South Bridge. And, you know, it's really where we end up at the end of the day, and that's the actual cost. And I think if you consider putting the tunnel through, looking at some additional funding from FAA that was brought up earlier, I truly believe that that's the best option. And I'm a big supporter of the evacuation route. I think it needs to happen, but I think we can make both the airport and the evacuation route happen. And we just need to do a little bit more work. Thank you.
Mr. Thomas, any further comment from the public? All right, see none, I will bring it back to council. Real quick, you know, just I think that's a great segue. Terry, I don't know, can you speak very briefly on how much the state went over on Grand Avenue Bridge, or how much the city went over our budget, awarded budget on 27th Street Bridge?
Interrupt really quickly and say, right before you said you're done with comments, you had two last people raise their hand, and this is an opportunity. I'm sorry, but
no, thank you. Thank you very much, Ingrid. Appreciate it. I need to do last call, I guess. But Terry, do you want to answer that while I'm going back to that?
Jonathan, I'm not as familiar, or I probably once was, but I don't remember the Grand Avenue Bridge very well. Jessica's texting me, and I'm certain she knows the number on the 27th Street Bridge. So if you give me a moment, I'll answer that question.
I thought, okay, fair enough. Thank you. Mr. Greg Rippey, address? Do you live here in Glenwood? Are you even from Glenwood, Mr. Rippey?
I live at the same place that Marilee Rippey did, 213 Creekside Court, Glenwood Springs. You got me, Mayor?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I was just giving a little flack there, Mr. Rippey. Go ahead. You got your minute.
That's never happened before, has it? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Council. I'm not going to be very long on this. I think all the salient points have been hit, and I'm struck by the fact that every public comment you got today was for the airport. There was not a single one that came and said, you know, we need to get rid of the airport. We need to do whatever we can to save costs, including a number of people, 5, I believe, that live very near the airport. And so I'd like council to take all that into consideration. And when you talk about $6 million for, as an estimate, as Mr. Thomas brought out, I know we're also considering spending $9 million for a pedestrian access from the BRT over under 27th Street. So even if it was $6 million, I think it's a bargain compared to a $9 million underpass under Highway 82 that won't handle a single vehicle. So, Mr. Mayor, Council, I know that you've got constraints that you need to start getting moving on this critical infrastructure project. Good luck in it. And I'm not going away. So hopefully one of these days we can meet in person and we can read each other's body language. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Council. Thank you, staff.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you also for your service for at least the last decade, if not more, to the Airport Commission, which you've chaired. Richard, you are speaking about Airport Commission.
All right, I tried to unmute 3 times. Am I unmuted?
You are, yes.
Okay, great. So, Greg just stole my thunder as usual, and he's a much better politician than I am. I just want to point out that the CDOT study on the...
Oh, Richard, you muted yourself. I didn't. I like you.
There you go. I didn't touch nothing. I just want to point out the CDOT study for the airport shows a direct impact to the community of 17 million, an indirect impact of 36 million. Compared to the 6 million we're talking about, that's kind of short-sighted. That's per year. The maintenance facility is critical not only to us, the local GWS pilots, but to the entire small plane community. That's statewide, has been shown. We've had a very short time on this EA change of number 34. So I would suggest that may be looked at more critically with the option 3, which is maybe, as Steve Shute put, maybe redirecting the bridge slightly and then going around the outside. I see my job as a commissioner just to go with what the pilots in the community seem to be saying, and that is, let's leave the tunnel in place, or at very minimum, let's move the bridge slightly so that it doesn't impact the end of the runway. And I'm gonna stop right there because this meeting is running very late. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sir, you had my respect, and now you have my my undying respect for that statement. Kevin or Sharon Brady?
Super quick question, and I'm sorry if this has been discussed in prior meetings and I didn't know. Sharon Brady, 716 Lincoln Avenue in Glenwood Springs. We used to live in South Glenwood. I very much appreciate the airport, all it does. From what Terry presented, am very supportive of the tunnel. And again, this is probably such a pedestrian question, but is this only an evacuation exit, or is this also a viable traffic, commute to Highway 82? And if so, how many cars are you expecting per day? That's my question.
Terry, Do you have a quick answer to that? I don't mind jumping in here if you can.
Yeah. So the build out 20-year estimate on the traffic study was like 11,500, somewhere in that range, and very close. It's less than 12,000 vehicles a day.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Sharon. Appreciate it. All right. Next we have Steve. Just Steve.
Hey, I hope you can hear me now. Yes, my name is Steve McClintock. I'm a pilot and an aircraft owner. I've flown into Glenwood Springs. I'm from Windsor, Colorado. And flying into Glenwood, you kind of have to be on your A game because it is kind of tricky with that river in front and the fact that you could sink. The air currents in front of the runway there sink down, and sometimes pilots come in a little bit high. You really don't want to shorten that runway at all. That would be detrimental, and you'd be inviting an accident. Secondly, there's a runway that's somewhat, well, it's got some similarities to your runway, and it's called Lake in the Hills out in Illinois, where I'm from. And they had a road within 100, maybe it's 150 feet of the runway, and the road was exactly perpendicular. And it was a smaller road, didn't get a lot of traffic, but they ended up moving it several hundred feet further out from the runway because they found that there was way too many incursions where airplanes came very, very close to cars or trucks. And if cars aren't looking, if they're not looking for an airplane coming at them from down the runway, they're going to miss it really easy. And I feel that you'd have a lot of conflicts there, and you definitely don't want to have those kind of problems. So thank you again for your study. I would strongly recommend going with the tunnel option for the $6 million. It'd be far cheaper than having some accidents and losing some lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Wes Miller.
Okay, can you hear me now, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. I just want to thank you and the City Council for hanging around this long. Short background, I live currently between Silton and Newcastle, but I grew up in West Bank, the old West Bank, the original one, and watched the airplanes fly over. And as I grew up, I was also a member of the Civil Air Patrol that was taking place at the Glenwood Springs Airport. And due to that, it instilled a love of aviation for me for a lifetime. I do appreciate everything that City Council does. I have served on a City Council for multiple terms. I've been on an airport board as well. I understand both sides of this and the difficulty you're going to have moving forward. That being said, I think that without having any of the aeronautical studies done, I think you're going to find a problem with a road that close to the end of the runway. Just as the last speaker had mentioned, if anything, they're going to tell you that runway would have to be shortened even more for the clearances that are going to be necessary for the end of the runway. And I think that the tunnel option is going to be the only one moving forward if the council wishes to keep that airport. And I deeply hope that they do. I've been in the Valley for many years. The airport has been there longer than any of us. And I hope that it stays there longer than any of us. And I know that as a council, sometimes we can look at things a little bit short-sighted and see things that are only in front of us and not be looking down the road for next generations. And one of the things coming forward that nobody's mentioned yet is the future of aviation and the future of smaller, one being electrical, vertical takeoff landing aircraft in a valley like Glenwood. Those are going to be a challenge. And as we move forward, the airport is going to be a base for vehicles of that type. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and let go of my time and just say thank you. The presentation was great. I hope that the city doesn't look at the $9 million tunnel as a large hindrance to a solution that needs to be done to get people out onto the highway and out off of Midland Avenue, which has been a disaster for many years. When I was a kid growing up in the 80s, Midland has been a problem forever. City councils have not been able to get that problem fixed. And I certainly hope that this city council is able to do that. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Lorraine Wilson. There you
Hello.
go. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Lorraine Wiltsey. I'm a longtime resident of South Glenwood, and I support the tunnel plan under the airport and the price tag for all the reasons mentioned. I attended many public meetings on this agenda item, and I really feel like we were all in agreement on this design for the airport tunnel and its future. And so I'm just a little concerned about where we are today in the future of the airport. And I'd just like to say on August 20th, 2020, City Council approved funds to support a $9 million for an underpass of 27th Street and Highway 82 for a bike path, which I'm not clear the citizens all are in agreement to wanting. Kind of seems like paving paradise. So it seems like a paradox. And I'm wondering if City Council might rethink that August 20th decision for a tunnel for a bike path and maybe put it towards a tunnel to the airport. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wilson. Appreciate it. All right. Taking it back, we've, I think, heard everybody. So Tony Hershey, go ahead. Public comment is officially closed right now.
I'm gonna, Mr. Mayor, time myself at 3 minutes because I think that that's fair, and I've just started my timer. I think Ms. Brady made a very good point. You know, fires and I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, if you and I had a disagreement, and I appreciate the emergency, and that's why Southbridge is essential. But it's also essential to move traffic in and out of Glenwood Springs. You know, the airport's important, and I support the airport, and I supported it during the campaign after Dave Merritt yelled at me. But I think we also have to consider the major issue in this community is traffic and moving people from 4 Mile in that area and where you live, Mr. Mayor, to Aspen on 82 on an alternative route without making them go into town and without making them go into town to go home. But a tunnel, I think, is very expensive. The last speaker really doesn't know what she's talking about. That tunnel under the bridge, under 82, is essential for safety on Glen, but it's a CDOT project and it's a project with the city, but the two are not comparable. It's apples and oranges. You know, we had people calling from Colorado Springs and Superior, and I know a lot of pilots like this, but we have airports around here in Aspen, Eagle, Rifle, certainly in Grand Junction, that also, you know, support a lot of what I think local pilots want. But I'm not an advocate for, just so I'm clear, the person from Superior yelled at me. You know, I'm an attorney, so sometimes I ask questions and make statements that are rhetorical so that we can ask some questions. Like, my question is, how much is it going to cost us if we just shut the thing down and then we don't have to worry about safety? That's not saying that that's maybe something we should do, but I think we've come up with a compromise here where we would shorten the airport. But I think, see, I have about a minute left. I think the decision that we have to make tonight, and I think what staff needs, is whether to proceed with this tunnel. And I know a lot of people feel like in the middle of the game, and Mrs. Rippey said that there's been sort of a change. And yeah, there's a change because it's really, really expensive and we can't afford it. So I would, if for my 2 cents, and my vote is I don't support a tunnel. It's way too expensive, but this is a compromise and not everyone's going to get what they want. But, you know, I appreciate the airport. It's a nice resource, but a great resource for this community is going to be this alternative route in and out of town. Now, if there were another way to do this, I'm certainly open to that too. But I think the tunnel, forget the cost of $6 million. And having worked, Mr. Mayor in Aspen on the straight shot that never happened, the cut and cover tunnel over the Merle's open space was exceptionally expensive, but then you forget the maintenance costs afterwards. And it's not just like you dig the tunnel and you're done and my time is up and then you're finished. So I would not support a tunnel. That's the bottom line. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Shelley, yes.
Okay, thank you. I think first off the bat, I wanted to clear up a couple of misstatements or misperceptions. First of all, the $9 to $10 million underpass at 27th, it's going to go under Glen Avenue, but also under 27th to access the BRT station. That is truly a $9 to $10 million project, but most of it is paid for by RAFTA funds and by CDOT funds. The city's contribution, I believe, is about $500,000. So the city is not paying $9 million for that project. So just to clear that up. And the other thing that I'd like to clear up is I really prefer if a member of the public does not put words in my mouth. If they want to try to represent something that I'm saying or that they think I support or don't support, please talk to me first and get my ideas on an issue, because I don't think that was accurately represented at all. I was actually on the citizen group and on the Transportation Commission when we started the Southbridge EA process, the whole NEPA process for that. And the importance of that bridge was seen as critical after the coal seam fire. We had the earmark that came through Scott McInnes to the city of Glenwood Springs to actually work on a safety route for evacuation. So there's a real understanding, and it's true. We looked at, I think Marilee mentioned 32 different options, all the way from putting a roadway right through poor Dave Merritt's house, straight across on Cypress Avenue, through all the way down past Oregon and going up the 4 Mile Creek. So everything was evaluated, and this option was decided on as the best option for the city. And the decision to do the tunnel was made so that the South Bridge and the importance of that project could move forward without being hindered by the political decision as to whether or not we open or close the airport, because that's something that the community has been struggling with and discussing for many, many years. And the decision of that group and the whole process was that this bridge is too important to get bogged down in that decision. So here we are today. We've got the NEPA process finished. We have an EA in place. It's been very long and drawn out. I think it started in 07 or 08, somewhere in there. And we did reach a decision, which was the option with the tunnel. And the $6 million has been shocking to all of us on council, especially as we hear from all of our citizens of how we need to be spending to get streets fixed. How can we spend $6 million to keep an airport? But that being said, again and again, that was the decision that was made through the EA process, through a lot of citizen input. And whenever we bring this airport discussion up, and it was mentioned by a couple of the speakers tonight, the majority of what we hear is support for the airport over and over again, even from people who live in South Glenwood Springs and are most impacted by it. In the section of town that I live in, I'm not that impacted by the airport. So I at this point, I really appreciate the options that have been brought forth by staff. I appreciate looking at that shortening of the runway, but there's a couple of issues with it. One of the biggest ones is cutting off that maintenance facility from the rest of the airport. We don't have a solution to that. That could be an expensive solution, either that or we're putting a small business potentially out of business and also hurting the airport. So I think without further data or study, the idea of shortening the runway just isn't a good solution right now. We have a solution that we reached through a very, very long and drawn out process with the EA, and that was to do the tunnel. And I think we have an application in for a $31 million BRIC grant. We still need to go talk to our county commissioners to help us fund this project. This project is not even in the city limits. It's on county land. The city's been spearheading it because we understand the importance of it. But actually, it's serving county residents up 4 Mile and others in the area. So it's a very important project. So I'm gonna support tonight that we stick with the EA, the record of decision on the EA with the tunnel under the airport, and we go after that $6 million in grant funding or other sources, and we make that work. And if we get to the point where we can't make that funding work, we have a big ask, $56 million to get this bridge built. I think we go forward with that decision. We stick with that and stay true to the purpose here. So that's how I'm feeling tonight, and I hope you guys can support that. I don't think we're ready for a motion yet. I'd like to hear more discussion.
We have Charlie, then Ingrid.
Shelley bid us about a motion. Maybe I missed it in the agenda packet. Are we supposed to be taking some action tonight? Is there supposed to be some decision point? Did I miss something?
Yes, we're going to be asked to move forward with and direct staff to do a tunnel, no tunnel option.
Okay, well then I have a question of Terry, if I can, and then maybe a comment. And Terry, the question I have is, 2 or 3 people raised the idea that there may be FAA funding that might be able to pay for the tunnel. Do you know if that is available, or if not you, maybe Deborah or someone else can weigh in on that? Maybe Carl looks like
Charlie, let me see if I can help a little bit. As you guys know, I spent some time as general counsel for the Grand Junction Airport, and Richard in my office has also worked fairly extensively with airports. In order to qualify for direct funding from the FAA and not the pass-through funding that we have gotten over the years from CDOT Aeronautical, we need to meet certain criteria, the first of which is to be on the national plan for integrated airport systems, which the Glenwood Airport has not been on. The farthest back Richard and I could do on the fly tonight is haven't been on that list. It's a 2-year list since at least before 2019, and are not listed on it moving forward currently either. So that would be the first hurdle. And that's more than likely because of all the things that have been described, mostly by the pilots, about the difficulty of landing here and the complexity of it, along with the fact that there are competing airports of Eagle, Grand Junction, the Rifle Airport as a general aviation, and then also the Aspen Airport, all competing for those funds and part of that program. If you were on that list, then you would have to compete for funds through what is called the AIP program, Airport Improvement Projects Plan, as well, before you'd be at a point where you might be awarded money or not directly from the FAA. So I think while it's a good idea, it is very difficult for us to achieve that with this particular airport. And so really the funding stream you'd be looking at would be through CDOT Aeronautical. And historically, those grants have been relatively small, comparatively speaking, a few $100,000, not a few $1 million. So that's kind of the background on the grants.
And if we, assuming the FAA is even something that's on the ballpark, what's the timing? How long would that take?
You're a couple of years out on getting on the major list for the FAA. CNOT Aeronautical, I think, has an annual grant cycle typically. And we've used that before. I mean, as those things, whether it's resurfacing the runway, things like that.
Kerry, one question for you that I think you can't answer. I know you've told me before, I just don't remember. What, if we put the tunnel in, what is the projected annual maintenance cost for that versus a non-tunnel roadway?
I've never gotten a firm answer from Jacobs on that, but talking to Deborah, I feel like a tunnel is a lot like, the bridges on our bridge system, a little bit different, but, in the same order, and to be fair, we haven't always set aside money for maintenance over time. like we should, but, you know, and, you know, I think that if we did this well, we would, you know, be saving for replacement at some point. And, you know, the lifetime on the bridge and on the tunnel should be in the order of about 50 years. And so, you know, if I had to put a number to it, you know, we should probably be, you know, saving over that time period and doing maintenance. And if Steve were online, he could probably tell me what that number is. But, you know, we really don't. I mean, it might be 20 grand a year. You know, that's probably what we are looking at. And I really want to comment on the FAA grants. Steve and I did sit with Scott Story, who's on the line, as well as his one of his bosses, Davey Lane, the director of aeronautics. And you know, they talked to us about getting federal grants and getting, you know, becoming an airport that would qualify for those types of grants. And he really said, you know, it's possible, but the odds are low. You know, you really, you know, those kinds of grants and that kind of status, you know, really begin with being a commercial airport and being able to support commercial flights. And we just, you know, we don't physically have the ability to be there, you know, in terms of runway lengths. You know, he didn't rule it out completely, but he just said the odds are stacked against you. It's a difficult thing to do.
Okay, thank you. I'll make a real brief comment because I know I'm taking up some time here. You know, I had hoped that the shortening of the runway configuration would be something that's viable, and you know, maybe economically it would be. We wouldn't know without doing the air survey, but what I heard fairly consistently tonight is that it wouldn't work from a pilot standpoint. So I don't think that's a viable option, given what all the comments that have been made. It is very difficult for me to in my fiduciary responsibility as a city council member, to spend $6 million more on a project. From what I perceive to be a very small benefit. I think we can use the airport without the runway to do most of the emergency stuff that's been talked about, you know, helicopters and things and fires, getting people in and out of the area medically and things like that without spending $6 million. So I can't support $6 million.
Thank you, Charlie. Ingrid.
This evening, there were no surprises in the people from the community who spoke up. They were proponents of something that they're passionate about. And I'm so grateful that all these years that the airport has kind of satisfied that. In addition, you learn that there are other amenities to it, including the firefighting benefits. To Councillor Hershey's defense, when we're getting calls from people who don't live here asking for our citizens to pay an increased tax to weather the tunnel, I have to take that off the table. That has no bearing on a decision that I would make. But I do see quite a few people on the list who showed up, as well as who spoke, who are locals. You're residents of my community, you've used it for years, and I don't take lightly a decision that would impact your ability to use it for the purposes that you've historically used it for. And at the same time, when a small amount of people use something, it is hard to justify that the remaining community would be responsible for the cost incurred. And so after this evening, once again, receiving more info, I struggle. I heard both sides of it. Thank you everyone who presented it so well, and that's both the public as well as staff. This is a hard decision. This isn't a decision that any of us will take lightly. And honestly, with my tenure being in months and not years, it's a hard decision for me to make. I do find some peace in the fact that everyone is a proponent of the South Bridge. Everyone has said, we want the South Bridge. that brings a lot of peace. The evacuation plans, the ability to make sure that our community is safe. That's huge. I'm inclined, and this may not go anywhere, but I'm inclined to make a motion to continue this, to allow us all to process the information that we heard this evening, so that we don't take it lightly, that we continue to process the information that we received in the presentation, and that we don't make a decision this evening, and we come back and make a decision at some point in the future. And so I can do it more clearly and see if we can get a second, and otherwise I will take it off the table. So I'll make a motion to continue this to another meeting to give us all an opportunity to pause and reflect and make a decision.
Is there a second?
I'll second it because Ingrid was so nice to me. Thank you.
All right.
Ingrid, how long are you thinking?
I'm not thinking long. I'm thinking like the next, I mean, even a week. I just know that there were things brought up this evening that I want to do a little more understanding research on. This is probably one of the biggest decisions that we'll make as a community in the last decade. Because what I'm hearing is that by shortening that runway, we dramatically reduce the functionality of that airport. And so we should, you know, and I can see the pros and cons to it. It feels more comfortable to me to not receive that information this evening and then make a quick decision. And maybe it's not quick for all of you, but it would be for me.
Thanks, Ingrid. So we have a motion by Ingrid, a pity second by Tony. Paula.
First, a little bit of clarity. When I've talked to you in the past, Terry, I believe you said that the road, the way the road is cut at the end of the airport, if we shorten it, would actually be slightly lower than the airport? Or can you describe what that is again? Because my sense from listening to some people is there was a perception that it was even with the airport and that was going to be a problem. So I just need some clarity on what that looks like. Yeah, you're correct. You know, the bridge actually lands on a bench below the airport, and you know, the consultants have evaluated the airspace, or I hate to use that word, but the headroom, I guess, above the car or the cars as they cross, you know, through a cut through the airport. So I don't believe that there's an issue with the cars passing with a shortened runway. But again, you know, we would go through that airspace analysis, but you know, they've at least looked at that. And would that make a difference, say, for a delivery truck? You know, we would be designing for that 14-foot clearance, that highway, you know, clearance. Now, you know, I wonder myself about, you know, just distraction. You know, if there's a car moving below you when you're coming in as a pilot, you know, does that distract you at all? That I don't know. And maybe that would be a part of an airspace analysis. Okay. And if we decide to postpone this meeting, would we be able to get an airspace analysis in a short time, or how long does that take? You know, I honestly don't know. We've been talking about it. I have yet to receive a cost for it. They were going to include that cost in our next amendment. I can ask if it could be rushed, but you know, they haven't given me any indication that that's a short process. Okay, because I feel kind of like we're trying to decide whether or not to shorten the airport. We don't even know if we can because of the airspace analysis, or if hands are kind of tied there. Yeah. So thank you. I appreciate that. Those were my questions, and I still lean towards it's a $6 million cost. We've committed. The city council has committed to putting $20 million towards these costs. And I think that was a big decision for us. I don't think that we could afford to incur more cost. I know we've reached out and at least presented to Garfield County, but as I believe Shelley mentioned, this is Garfield County property.
that the South Bridge will be going through, and it is going to benefit Garfield County residents, not just city residents in South Glenwood. And I think that we need to figure out that kind of partnership funding if we're looking at this kind of cost of 56 million. When people discussed a 5 to 10% overrun, we still have to say it's a 5 to 10% overrun on 56 million or 57 million that we'd be looking at. So really our costs are only going to go higher there if we decide to move forward with the tunnel portion of this. And this town has a lot of needs. This town is one question after another on every council meeting I go to is on how do we pay for this infrastructure cost? How do we pay for our streets? How do we, it's just, we have an endless supply of where to spend this money. So I am just very cautious about saying, no problem, throw an extra $6 million on there. And on top of that, we could have 5 to 10% cost overrun on any big project that we do along this way. And if I remember right, coming into this first airport discussions, when I started to become aware of it, I was being told a 40.
Paula, you froze a bit.
I can't hear Polly, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, her screen's frozen. So Paula, hey, try to just take your video off if you can hear me. Just take your video off. A lot of times the audio streams a lot better if you're not clogging up the bandwidth with video as well.
Why doesn't she have broadband?
Because we haven't got it to everybody's house yet, Matt Langhorst.
Thanks a lot, Matt.
Am I back?
You are back. Absolutely.
Thank you. I am sorry. I'm really desperately hoping for new internet. This has been really tough living in a Zoom world. Anyways, I am highly concerned about spending another $6 million on this project, even though I really am listening to all of these community members, and I understand that this would be a change and impact on them. If we could make this option work with a shorter airfield for most of the people using that airport, I think that would be great. But again, we're kind of stuck because we need that airspace analysis to know if that's viable. So that's kind of like Ingrid. I'm kind of standing here a little bit going, I need to think about this, but I'm leaning towards saving that money.
Thanks, Paula. Steve Davis.
Question for Terry again. And Terry, maybe you can help me with the math, but what we've talked about is extending the runway to the north, cutting off the runway to the south. My math shows a net difference of about 43 feet. Am I correct or wrong about that?
You are correct. In that option 2, we end up shortening by about 43 feet. It's not, well, it's not a lot.
Yeah, 43 feet versus $6 million is, that's a pretty easy decision.
Okay. I don't think I have, honestly, anything to add beyond what's been said. Shelley, do you have one quick final thought?
Oh, just one final thought based on Steve's comment, and the thing that's kind of been the linchpin in that in this shorter runway option for me is that we cut off the maintenance facility from the rest of the airport, and then the other hangars that are down there south of the airport. And the estimate in trying to move those is comparable to the tunnel, I believe. We don't know what that would cost, and it's not necessarily a city cost, but it is a big impact to the airport. And as we heard from a lot of comment tonight, it's a really important element of the airport. So.
All right, Charlie, last thoughts.
No, there's a motion on the table to continue this for 1 week. I think it's fair to let us all think about this for 1 week. I assume that's not going to delay the city. We would make this an early item. I don't want to make it the first one because I know we pushed off other things to the first item next week, but I wouldn't have any objection to letting this sit for a week and deciding at the meeting next week. So I'd like us to vote on that motion, and then we can figure out whether if that doesn't pass, we can go to the underlying issue.
Yeah, I would say that, thank you. I would say that if we do continue this to the next meeting, we've already heard all the council comments. We've already heard all the public comment. The next meeting is simply a vote, up or down vote. I think we do it right after the discussion on Blake Street. And it's just as simple as that. So, all right, there is a motion on the floor and a enthusiastic second by Councilor Hershey. Steve Boyd, I'm sorry, no. We have a city clerk now. Ryan, can you please call the question?
Sure can. Councilor Hershey.
Yes. Reluctantly,
Councilor
yes.
Stepp. Councilor Stepp.
Thank you, Ryan. Sorry.
Oh, that's all right.
Yes.
Councilor Davis.
No.
Mayor Godes. Godis.
It's okay. I'll respond to either one. No.
Mayor Pro Tem Kaup.
Yes.
Councilor Wusso.
Yes.
And Councilor Willman.
Reluctantly, yes.
All right. It passes.
So, Mr. Mayor, after Blakegate, that'll be about 11 p.m. We'll be talking about the airport.
Yes, I think that would be the case.
So everyone who's, no, but I'm teasing, but there are a lot of people listening, Mr. Vic, Mr. Merritt, Mr. Knott, who I know are very interested in this. So I wanted to give them a sense that we would get to it a week from tonight, pretty early, relatively early.
I think that that's fair to say. I think we did take a council vote to have the Blake Street conversation be the first item of conversation. So I think we owe that to ourselves to fulfill that, and this would be the second one. Again, please, public, just know I see still 49 attendees out there. We will not be taking any more public comment. If you tune in, whether it be here or YouTube, it's only to see the final vote. I just want to make expectations clear. I don't mean to be a jerk about it. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you very much for all the public comment. Thank you, council, for your comments, staff, for all your hard work on this. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion, Mr. Mayor, to adjourn.
Your second.
I'll second.
Been moved by Tony, seconded by Paula. All those in favor signify by raise your hand saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we are adjourned until our next regular meeting a week from this evening. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.